I was halfway through my shift, staring at the dull green glow of the dispatch monitors, when the call came in. It was just past midnight, the hour where everything slows down, and the town feels like it's holding its breath. The phone rang with that shrill, piercing sound, and for a moment, I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but the silence that followed my hesitation made me pick it up. 911, what's your emergency? I said, my voice sounding rough even to me, like gravel sliding through a tin can. The line was filled with static at first, a harsh, buzzing crackle that made my teeth ache. I paused, thinking it was some kid messing with the system or a faulty line. But then, I heard something else. Soft, barely there, like a whisper brushing against the edge of my ear. It didn't speak words, at least none I could make out. Just a sigh, or maybe a voice straining through some kind of filter. Hello? I tried again, sharper this time. Static, and then a sound that made the blood in my veins slow. Something that was almost a laugh, but not quite. It was wet, gurgling, like it had crawled up from some dark hole. My fingers froze on the headset, and for the first time in years, I felt that cold claw of fear grip my spine. Sir, if this is a joke. I began, but the line cut me off, swallowed my words into a mouth of buzzing white noise. I leaned back in my chair, heart hammering, listening. The dispatch center was quiet except for the hum of computers and the faint tapping of a distant keyboard. Everyone else had gone home for the night, leaving me with the screens and the endless rows of flashing lights. I tried to tell myself it was just interference, that there was a logical explanation. But logic felt distant, like a word I could almost remember but not fully grasp. Then I heard it again. That sound, low, wet, dragging across the line. It was closer now, like it had noticed me. I couldn't move my hand. My brain kept saying, pick up the radio, call it in, do something. But I just sat there listening, as though if I moved too quickly, I would break something fragile and horrifying into the world. Dispatch. I whispered, static, and then the whisper, not through the phone, but in my ear. Not loud enough for anyone else to hear, but real enough that my stomach twisted. Help me, it said, or maybe my mind made it say that. Words are so slippery sometimes, easy to twist into fear. I grabbed the phone again. 911? Where are you? Silence. And then a click. Not the normal click of call ending, but a slow, wet sound like something had moved across the microphone. Something heavy. My stomach dropped. I felt it before I heard it. A presence. Not in the room. Not yet. But behind the phone, behind the wires, like it had slipped in through the gaps of the world I thought was solid. I checked the caller ID. It was my own town, my own exchange, and the number wasn't listed. Private, maybe blocked. Standard for prank calls, sure. But standard didn't feel right anymore. My pulse was a drum in my ears. I tried again. Sir? Ma'am? Hello? This time, a sound answered me. Not words. Just a breath, ragged and wet, followed by a scratching noise. Fingernails, maybe, or something pretending to be. My chest went tight, like the air had been sucked out of the room, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had been truly alone. Not in the room, but in the world. I thought about calling it in, paging backup, alerting someone else. But I didn't. I couldn't, because the moment I touched the radio, the line changed. A low, grinding hiss filled my ears, making my teeth ache. And I swear I heard a voice, closer than before, saying, "Don't leave me here." I pulled back, trembling. The chair creaked beneath me. I looked around the empty dispatch center. Shadows clung to corners and walls, stretching and bending in ways they shouldn't. I blinked, thinking exhaustion was making me see things. But then my headset moved, just slightly, like a finger had brushed it. I froze. I told myself it was my own hand, that I was imagining it. But the room was still cold, and the shadows didn't line up with anything. And the static on the line, it had changed. It was no longer just interference. It was alive, shifting, wet, a heartbeat buried inside the white noise. I tried to hang up, tried to disconnect, but the line stayed alive, humming, waiting. And then I heard it, clear as day, cutting through the static. My name. Sheriff. I fell back in my chair. My fingers gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white. The voice didn't belong to anyone I knew. It was hollow, stretched, like it had been twisted through 100 mouths. But it knew me, knew this room, knew the sound of my heartbeat. I thought about dialing out, tracing the call, anything, but my hands wouldn't obey. And then I realized I couldn't see the number change. It was stuck, staring back at me from the screen. Private, empty, watching. Minutes passed. Hours, maybe. Time felt wrong. The hum of computers became unbearable, and every light on the monitors seemed to flicker in response to my fear. I could feel in the shadows now, like heat radiating from them, like the room was breathing around me. And then, as abruptly as it began, the line went dead. Just silence. Empty. My heart still rattling in my chest. I picked up the handset again. Nothing. No dial tone. No static. Nothing. I sank into my chair, hands covering my face. I wanted to scream, wanted to call someone else, wanted to tell myself this was just a bad dream, but the feeling didn't leave. Not even when I turned on every light in the room. Not even when I checked the doors. It was in the room. Somewhere. Watching. Waiting. I didn't know how long I sat there, paralyzed. Maybe 15 minutes. Maybe an hour. The hum of the computers became unbearable. Every shadow was a hand. Every flicker of light a face. And somewhere deep in the back of my mind, I knew it had left something behind on the line. A residue. A memory. Something that could find me even when the phone was off. When I finally stood, I felt in my chest. A pressure. Tight, insistent. Like a weight pressing down from behind my eyes. I wanted to shake it off, but it wouldn't go. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining it, but my body wouldn't believe it. And the whisper, I could still hear it, faint, almost mocking. Don't leave me here. I left the dispatch center that night, feeling like I had crossed some invisible line. The empty street seemed darker than usual, the wind carrying echoes I couldn't place. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something, anyone behind me, but the town was still, empty, silent. Back at home, I couldn't sleep. The static played behind my eyelids, low and constant. And I realized something I didn't want to admit. It hadn't been a call. Not really. It had been an invitation. Something reaching out through wires and fear, and the thin barrier between now and something else. Something that knew my name. I tried to shrug it off in the morning, to tell myself it was fatigue, some glitch, a prank. But deep down, I knew better. There was a part of me, smaller, quieter, that understood, that knew it hadn't ended, that it was still out there, waiting, and if it had my name and knew my room and could reach through the lines, what else could it know? The sheriff's life is supposed to be about control, about order. But that night, I realized just how fragile that illusion is. One call, one strange voice, and everything I thought I understood about safety, about distance, about separation from the dark, vanished. I went back to the station the next night, headset in hand, lights on, trying to convince myself the line would remain silent. But I knew it wouldn't. I could feel it lingering like a shadow in my chest, waiting, listening, remembering. And I, for the first time in 20 years on this job, felt something I never thought I would. Truly, utterly, helplessly afraid. I couldn't shake the call. Even hours later, after the static faded and the line went dead, it lingered in my mind like a scent I couldn't name. I knew I should have let it go, that it was probably some prank or a wiring glitch in the old town system. But something about the whisper, "Don't leave me here," etched itself into my chest. My hands itched to grab the cruiser keys, to go out there, to see if there was someone or something actually waiting. The night was cold, the kind of cold that slides under your skin and makes your bones ache. I started the car, the engine grumbling like a tired animal, and rolled out into the empty streets. Streetlights flickered as I passed, their yellow glow cutting shallow slices through the darkness. Most of the town was asleep, all of it except for me, driving toward whatever I half believed was waiting at the other end of the call. I took the old county road, the one that winds through dense woods and long stretches of nothing, the kind of place parents warn their kids about but never explain why. The headlights carved two narrow paths through black, the rest swallowed whole. And then, as I drove, I felt it. Shadows, moving along the edges of the road, just at the edge of vision, bending unnaturally. I told myself it was trees swaying, maybe a stray animal, but the shapes moved differently. They followed the curve of the road as I drove, sliding between the trunks, always matching me. I caught glimpses in the mirrors. No headlights reflected back. No branches shook. Just the darkness, shifting, heavy and deliberate. I swallowed hard and kept driving, telling myself I was imagining it. That's what we tell ourselves in this job. You see something, you explain it away. Fatigue. Night vision playing tricks. Too many hours staring at screens. But my pulse wasn't letting me lie. Every time I blinked, something lingered at the corner of my sight. A figure crouching just beyond the beam of the headlights. Then gone when I looked directly. The wind picked up along the road, carrying a smell that didn't belong. Wet earth, yes, but something else. Something metallic, coppery like blood. I grimaced and rolled up the window, trying to shut the sensation out. The radio was off, my usual companion in long drives at night. I didn't want company. I didn't want sound. The static from the 911 call was still in my ears, and I feared that adding voices or music would drown out the subtle warning I felt pressing at the edges of reality. Then the shadows moved closer. I couldn't see faces, only forms, dark smudges that seemed to breathe, or maybe I imagined the breathing. I tried to focus on the road, but my eyes kept drifting. One figure, taller than a man, slipped across the road behind me, bending around the guardrail with impossible grace. Another waited at the tree lean, perfectly still, staring, and I felt it, a pull in my chest, urging me to stop, to turn around, to leave this road and run. But something else pushed back. Curiosity, duty, or maybe stubbornness. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white. The headlights barely reached the curve ahead, leaving the rest of the road in pitch darkness. I noticed that every time I passed a tree, a shadow seemed to stretch from it, leaning, reaching toward the car, then recoiling as if I was too fast, too bright, too alive. I knew I was alone. The radio tower, the next farmhouse, even the county line. Everything was miles away. Nothing should be here except the wind, the trees, and me, but I wasn't alone. The feeling in my chest grew, heavy, pressing, tight. My skin prickled as if the shadows themselves were crawling under it. I tried to hum to myself, anything to distract, but the silence swallowed my voice. The road curved again, and I thought I saw a movement in the headlight's reflection off the rear view mirror. Something crouched there, watching me, mimicking me, a dark echo of myself. I shook my head, and it vanished. The hair on my neck stood up. I wanted to call dispatch, to tell someone where I was, but my throat felt full of lead. My fingers trembled as I considered the radio. Even if someone answered, what would I say? Shadows are following me. They'd chalk it up to exhaustion. They'd laugh. They'd hang up. But I knew what I saw, knew what I felt. It wasn't imagination. Not completely. I slowed, trying to see better, trying to let my eyes adjust. The road narrowed here, flanked by thick woods on both sides. And then I realized I hadn't passed a single sign, a single mile marker. The road twisted, unmarked, endless. My gut twisted with dread. Something about this stretch felt wrong, as if it shouldn't exist. And then I heard it, soft, almost imperceptible at first. A footstep, or maybe multiple footsteps, following me, crunching leaves just beyond the headlights, but keeping pace. I froze. My fingers were frozen on the wheel. I dared not breathe. It stopped when I stopped. I forced the car forward, inch by inch. The footsteps returned, rhythmic now, synchronized with my movements. I risked a glance into the rear-view mirror. Nothing, only darkness. But I knew better. My heart knew. Something was there, always there, just beyond the light, watching, waiting, breathing. I told myself to focus. The world was rational. Trees, shadows, wind, nothing more. And yet, every instinct screamed at me that I was trespassing in something older than the pavement, older than the county itself. Something patient, something hungry, something that didn't exist in maps or ordinances. The road straightened, and I thought I saw a figure step into the headlights. A tall, thin shape, pale and indistinct, like a smear of moonlight on black paint. My stomach dropped. I blinked. It was gone. Nothing there. Nothing but the road. And yet I felt it. Eyes, watching, judging, tracking every breath. I pressed the accelerator, the engine whining in protest. My eyes darted to the mirrors constantly, checking for movement, checking for shapes. The shadows lengthened, moved closer to the car. I could feel them pressing against the edges of my vision, like dark water lapping at the glass, testing, probing, daring me to look directly. And then the whisper came, soft, almost drowned by the wind to the cracked window. "Sheriff." I slammed on the brakes. My hand shook, the steering wheel vibrating under my grip. The whisper came again, more insistent this time. "Don't leave me." I wanted to scream. I wanted to flee. But my body felt heavy, like the night itself had wrapped around me and pinned me in place. I realized then that the shadows weren't outside. They were inside me, twisting in my chest, crawling under my skin. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but every muscle refused. I forced the car into motion again, tearing down the road, my headlights bouncing off empty trees, my mirrors reflecting only black. The whisper followed, growing clearer, louder. I didn't dare answer. I didn't dare. And then, as I rounded a bend, the road ended. Not a sudden wall, not a town, just nothing. The asphalt melted into darkness, a void stretching ahead. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering. The shadows were closer now, bleeding into the car itself. I could feel their weight, pressing on my shoulders, crawling along my arms, whispering, always whispering. I couldn't see them clearly. I couldn't name them, but I knew their intent. Patient, waiting, wanting, and somehow they had found me. Somehow, the road had led me here, to this place that shouldn't exist on any map, at this time when the world is supposed to sleep. I turned the car around as best I could, tires crunching over gravel, the engine screaming. And even as I drove back toward the lights of the town, toward the faint glow of civilization, I knew it hadn't ended. The shadows would follow. They always follow. And the whisper in my ear would never leave me. Don't leave me here. I didn't dare look over my shoulder again. I drove until the road seemed to bend back on itself, twisting into darkness that swallowed the headlights. Somewhere ahead, where the map should have shown nothing but empty woods, a house appeared. It wasn't a place I'd ever seen before, not in any report, not on any satellite image, not in memory. And yet there it stood, tall and crooked, a shadow of wood and stone against the black sky. I slowed the cruiser, heart thumping like a drum I couldn't control. The road ended in a gravel driveway, half covered by overgrown weeds. The house looked abandoned, but the feeling it radiated was active, alive, waiting. Its windows were dark, yet they seemed to pulse, breathing slowly like lungs. I told myself it was just my imagination. The woods were alive with shadows at night. My eyes were tired. But deep down, a corner of my mind, the part one usually ignored, knew this was wrong. The air around the house was colder, not just cool, but the kind of cold that makes your skin prickle, that creeps under your clothes and presses against your bones. I stepped out of the car, boots crunching gravel, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind stopped. The leaves hung suspended in the air. Even the shadows refused to move. I walked to the front door. The wood was warped and rotting, paint peeling like curling skin. I could see scratches along the frame, long, deep gouges that no normal animal could make. My stomach churned. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to leave. But something drew me forward, an insistence that was not human, whispering in the edges of my mind. The door opened easily, almost too easily, with a groan that echoed through the house like it had been waiting for me. The smell hit first, rot, damp wood, and something metallic underneath, like old blood. I swallowed hard, forcing myself inside. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness. Dust motes floated like tiny ghosts in the narrow beam. I took a step, then another, and the floorboards moaned under my weight. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, peeling in long ribbons. And then I saw them, Marks on the walls. Deep scratches, clawed at an angle that suggested something frantic. Something trapped. I pressed my hand to the wall, and the wood felt cold. Too cold. Not just cold air, but a living cold, as though the house itself was breathing beneath my fingers. I moved from room to room, each step slower than the last. The furniture was covered in dust, sheets thrown over shapes I couldn't identify. I lifted one sheet and almost vomited. Beneath it lay a chair, carved deeply with symbols I didn't recognize. Dark, jagged runes that seemed to crawl across the wood. My flashlight flickered, and I had to blink, convinced the symbols moved when I wasn't looking. The air grew heavier. Every breath I drew tasted metallic, bitter. I heard something, a soft, wet scuffing noise behind me. I spun, flashlight cutting a narrow swath of light across the room. Nothing, but the sound came again, closer, dragging along the floor. My pulse quickened. I wanted to run, but my feet refused. Something about this place had me rooted, like the house itself had reached inside my mind and pinned me in place. I found the stairs. They led up into darkness, curling tight and steep. I hesitated, listening. The house was silent now, but the silence wasn't empty. It pressed on me, low and waiting like the moment before a scream. I climbed slowly, each step groaning under my weight, echoing up the staircase and down the hollow walls. At the top, the hallway stretched like a tunnel of shadow. Rooms lined each side, doors warped and cracked. Some hung open slightly, revealing darkness that seemed to sway. I entered the first room. It was a child's room. Small bed, stripped of sheets, but toys scattered across the floor. Dolls broken and stained, their eyes missing. One sat upright in the corner, its head tilted at an impossible angle. I felt my stomach tighten. The air smelled faintly of decay, and I realized with horror that the scent wasn't coming from the house. It was coming from me, from my skin, from my mind. I moved to the next room, a bedroom larger, with a cracked mirror hanging on the wall. In the reflection, I saw it. Not myself, not fully. A shadow crouched behind me, impossibly thin, impossibly tall. I spun around. Nothing, but the mirror still showed it, curling around my legs like smoke, pressing against me. My hands shook as I reached to touch the glass. The reflection didn't move with me, didn't obey. It waited, watching, grinning, maybe or maybe screaming. I couldn't tell. The next room down the hall was the worst. A study, or what had once been a study. Papers scattered across the floor, yellowed and brittle. Some pages had writing, frantic and scrawled. Words I couldn't read but felt in my chest, clawing. Drawings, too. Dark figures, twisted houses, symbols curling across the margins like living things. And then I saw it, in the corner. A chair tipped over, a small shape slumped beside it. A doll? No. Human? I didn't dare approach. But the shape shifted slightly, just enough to remind me it was real. I stumbled back into the hallway, heart hammering. Every door seemed alive now, quivering slightly as if something inside was breathing, waiting, watching. I turned to descend the stairs, and that's when I noticed the marks on the walls. They weren't just scratches anymore. They were faces, half-formed in wood, screaming silently, eyes hollow, mouths open in eternal terror. I pressed my flashlight against one, and for a fraction of a second, it blinked. The sound came again, wet, dragging, echoing from somewhere below. I froze, every muscle tensed. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. The shadows on the walls twisted and stretched, reaching toward me. And then a whisper, not through the phone this time, not faint, right beside my ear, inside my head. "Sheriff, don't leave." I bolted down the stairs, tripping, heart hammering, and the house seemed to resist. Floorboards shifted beneath me, walls stretching, ceilings bending. I had to fight not to scream as I slammed through the front door. The night air hit me like a punch, sharp and biting. My flashlight fell to the gravel, beams slicing the darkness. The house stood there, crooked and silent. But now I noticed something worse. It was different, shifting, not fully real. One moment, it was the building I had entered. The next, the roof stretched impossibly, the windows rearranged, doors opening where there had been walls. And the shadows, they slipped out along the ground, pooling at the edges of the driveway, waiting, patient, silent. I jumped into the cruiser, hands shaking so badly I couldn't start the engine. When I finally did, the headlights swept over the driveway, and the house was gone. Just empty trees, gravel, nothing. My pulse hit a frantic rhythm. I backed up slowly, scanning, thinking maybe I had imagined it. Maybe my mind had made the place up to punish me for not letting the call go. But I knew better. I had been inside it. I had smelled it, felt it, listened to it, driving back toward the county road. My mind churned. Nothing I knew could explain what I had seen. No maps, no property records, no history. The place shouldn't exist. And yet, every instinct screamed at me that it was real, that it still waited somewhere just out of reach, watching, reshaping itself, patient and eternal. I tried to talk myself down, to reason away, but every memory of the house pressed against my thoughts. The faces and the walls, the whispering, the weight of something ancient pressing on my chest, and the shape in the mirror, the shadow that followed me up the stairs. I could still see it if I closed my eyes. Always there, grinning, waiting. The road back to town was empty, silent. The shadows of the trees seemed to reach toward the car, stretching longer with every passing mile. I dared not look in the mirrors, dared not glance at the darkness that clung to the edges of the headlights. But I felt it, always at the corner of my vision, a presence that refused to leave, no matter how far I drove. By the time I reached the main highway, the night had settled again into ordinary silence. Streetlights glared down at me, houses on either side sleeping in normalcy. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was out there somewhere just beyond the lights, waiting, shifting, reshaping itself for the next unfortunate soul. I knew it wouldn't stay gone. The world of maps and roads and houses is orderly. The world I had just touched was not. I parked at the station, hands trembling, and finally allowed myself to breathe. But I couldn't stay still. Every creak of the building, every hum of a light or computer made me jump. The memory of the house's cold walls and the whispering shadows pressed against my mind like wet cloth. And I knew, deep down, that it hadn't let me go. Not really. Sleep was impossible that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hallway, the symbols, the faces. I heard the whisper, faint but insistent, carrying across the empty spaces of the room. Don't leave me. And I understood then that it didn't matter where I drove, how far I ran, or how much light I turned on. The house had left something in me, a residue, a memory, a thread connecting me to it. And somewhere, in some shifting corner of the world, it waited for next time I, or someone else, would walk too close. The Vanishing House, a name I'll never forget, a place that shouldn't exist, a horror that doesn't obey the rules of maps, reality, or reason. And I, standing on the edge of comprehension, realized the worst truth. Some places aren't meant to be found. Some calls aren't meant to be answered. Some shadows are patient enough to follow you forever. I thought the house was behind me. I thought leaving it on that empty road, fading into nothing, had ended it. I was wrong. The first time it happened, I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the mug of coffee I didn't remember making. The night outside was black, thick and unmoving, and then I heard it, soft, almost imperceptible at first. My own voice, barely a whisper, repeating something I had never spoken aloud. It was a memory I thought I had buried, a secret I had carried for years, tucked away behind duty and routine. And there it was, floating across the room in a voice I recognized as my own. I froze, hands gripping the edge of the table. The sound wasn't coming from the walls or the floor, not from the street or the empty house across town. It was everywhere and nowhere. I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself it was exhaustion, a trick of my mind after weeks of late-night calls and long drives. But the whisper came again, clearer, almost insistent. You let it happen. I jerked upright, scanning the kitchen. Everything was as it should be. Dirty dishes in the sink, the fridge humming, the old clock ticking away the seconds. Yet the whisper didn't stop. It repeated my thoughts, my doubts, Things I'd never told anyone, even in the confessional silence of a patrol car. I tried to speak, to call out, but my voice felt heavy, thick in my throat. The whispers weren't just words. They were accusations, memories turned against me, secrets I'd held too tightly. Every time I moved, the sound followed, shifting, layering, like a chorus of shadows repeating my life back at me. I got up and walked to the living room, trying to focus on the mundane, the furniture, the flickering streetlights through the blinds, the faint hum of the refrigerator. But the whispering followed, growing louder, and then I realized it wasn't just repeating my secrets. It was commenting on them, twisting them, turning them into something darker. You should have stopped it. You watched it happen. I sank into a chair by the window, gripping the arms until my knuckles burned. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but what could I say? That voices were speaking my sins aloud? That my own life was a story being narrated by some unseen force? I was alone. Absolutely, terrifyingly alone. And the house, the shadows had left something behind. It started subtly at first, a flicker in the corner of my vision, a shadow moving when nothing could move. I convinced myself it was tired eyes, imagination. But then came the sounds, the soft shuffle of feet, the brush of air across my skin, the faint pressure at the back of my neck. Always there, always just beyond perception. And then voices, not whispers now, but murmurs, overlapping, almost conversational. My own voice again, but not just repeating. Speaking thoughts I hadn't admitted to anyone. Confessions, fears, regrets. They weren't just words. They were instruments of pressure, slowly folding my mind, exposing the raw edges of who I was. I remember one moment, clearly, sitting in the darkened living room, realizing that the voice knew more than I did. It knew my guilt, my failures, my quiet moments of cruelty. It repeated them with precision, every syllable sharpened by some intelligence I could not identify. You left him there. You didn't act. You ignored the warning. I froze. My pulse raced. And yet the voice didn't stop. It escalated, layering, echoing across the walls, under the floorboards, through the air ducts, filling the house with a presence I couldn't locate or escape. You watched her suffer. You let it happen. You are alone. I ran. My own legs carried me to the bedroom, to the shower, to any place I could think to hide, but it followed. In the shower, it whispered over the hiss of water. In the bedroom, it crept along the walls. I tried to block it out, tried to scream, but my own voice became part of the chorus. You are weak. You are guilty. You are forgotten. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear it, surrounding me, turning my own memories into cages. I started leaving lights on, pacing the house in exhaustion, but the darkness didn't matter. It could enter any place I thought safe. The shadows didn't move in normal ways. They slipped, stretching, lingering, curling around the edges of my vision. And the voice was always there, waiting, patient, intimate, cruel. I began keeping a notebook. Anything I heard, anything I saw, I wrote down. Names, thoughts, scraps of sentences. I thought it might help, give me a way to separate reality from whatever this was. But even the writing felt like it was wrong. The letters would shift if I glanced away. Sometimes phrases I hadn't written appeared on the page. Sometimes the whispers repeated what I had just written before my hand, even touched the pen. You cannot escape. You are here. You are alone. One night, I thought I caught it. In the mirror, I saw a movement behind me, not a reflection of the house or the room, not a shadow cast by my own body. Something there, crouched, tall and thin, stretching impossibly. I spun around. Nothing. But when I looked back, the reflection had changed. My own face was different. Hollowed eyes, pale, stretched, whispering secrets I hadn't even admitted to myself. I backed away, tripping over the rug, heart hammering. And then it spoke again, not softly this time. Clear, deliberate. Sheriff, we know you. I fell to my knees, shaking. I didn't understand. How could something know me so completely? Not just my actions, but my thoughts, my private regrets, the mistakes I had buried under years of routine. The shadows had followed me from the road, from the vanishing house, from somewhere I couldn't name. And now they had learned me, learned my fears, learned my guilt. I began hearing other things too. Footsteps in the hall when no one was there. Doors opening, closing, furniture shifting. Sometimes I would glance into the hallway and see shapes, crouching at the edges of light, listening, patient. The house itself didn't feel real anymore. My own home didn't feel real. Nothing felt real except the whispering, repeating, shaping me, folding me into its knowledge. I tried to fight it. I spoke aloud, demanded silence, pleaded with the voices to stop. But every word I said was absorbed, twisted, returned. You lied. You betrayed. You failed. The accusations grew louder, faster, like a drumbeat I couldn't escape. I stopped trusting my own mind. Every thought I had became suspect. Every memory might be another weapon it could turn against me. The shadows became mirrors, reflecting not what I was, but what I feared I was. And I began to wonder if I had ever been alone at all, or if the whispers had been tracking me, studying me, long before that call, long before the vanishing house. Sleep, if I dared, brought dreams I couldn't distinguish from reality. Dreams where I walked the empty road again, the shadows closing in, the house looming just beyond the trees. Dreams where the whisper was inside my own mouth, forcing me to speak confessions I had never thought to voice. Every morning, I woke more exhausted, more hollowed, more afraid of myself than of anything outside. I started leaving lights on all over the house. Every room, every hallway, every corner illuminated, but the darkness didn't care. It found me in the light, slithered along the edges, crept up behind doors I had locked, whispered from vents and walls. Always there. We are here. We know you. You cannot hide. Food lost its taste. Water lost its relief. I began pacing constantly, hands shaking, nerves raw. Every sound, every movement, every whisper of the wind outside became a potential threat. And always the voices, repeating my past, twisting it, turning it into chains around my mind. You watched. You ignored. You are alone. I tried leaving, driving away, moving to another town, calling friends, anyone who could confirm reality. But the whispers followed. They weren't bound to a place anymore. They were inside me now, inside my skull, threading through my thoughts, curling around my heartbeat. The world outside was irrelevant. It could come anywhere. It could find me anywhere. I've started talking to myself just to separate my voice from the others, repeating mundane things aloud. I need to make coffee. I need to check the mail. But even then, I sometimes catch the whisper in the background, repeating, mocking, you can't escape. You are here. We know you. I don't know how long I can last like this. I pace, I write, I talk, I sleep in short bursts. But the whispers are always there, patient, waiting. They know the things I won't speak, the things I can't admit even to myself. And every night, I feel the house's shadows stretching into my home, creeping along the edges, folding my reality into its own. I understand now. I am part of it, or it is part of me. I don't know where one ends and the other begins. I hear my own secrets whisper back to me, every regret, every fear, every hidden sin. And the more it knows, the louder it becomes, until silence is impossible. Until I am impossible. And still, the whisper repeats, don't leave me here. The night was quiet, quieter than it had any right to be. I pulled my cruiser into the cemetery parking lot, the tires crunching on gravel that had settled over decades of forgotten graves. Routine patrol. That's what I told myself. Just a routine check, nothing more. But something about the way the moon hung low, pale and heavy, made the world feel off, like the air itself was holding its breath. I switched on the overhead lights for a moment, just enough to scan the entrance. The gate was old, wrought iron curling into shapes meant to be elegant, but now more threatening than beautiful. The hinges groaned in the wind, not loud, not sudden, but long and low, like a warning. I eased the car inside, gripping the wheel tighter than I realized. The cemetery had always been creepy at night. Long shadows stretched between the stones, the ones that leaned and cracked as if burdened by the weight of the dead. Usually, I didn't notice them too much. I'd been here hundreds of times, making my rounds, checking for trespassers or vandalism. Tonight felt different. I parked near the center road, where the older graves were, the ones that dated back 100 years or more. Moss covered most of the stones, letters worn almost beyond recognition. I stepped out, boots crunching over the gravel and scattered leaves, and felt the cold hit me all at once. Not just the temperature, but a cold that slid under my coat, into my spine, pressing against my shoulders. I started walking, flashlight in hand, sweeping the beam across the headstones. Everything looked normal at first. In that static way the dead remain. But then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. One of the stones, older, leaning slightly, had fresh scratches across its surface. Long, jagged lines, like something had clawed at it. My first thought was vandalism, but the pattern was deliberate, almost deliberate in a way that suggested a message. I bent closer, trying to see if there was a name or date I recognized. Nothing I could make sense of, just scratches. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching. My flashlight beam cut across the stones, the tall shadows stretching longer than they should have. The wind whispered through the trees, a soft susurration that sounded almost like voices, but not quite. I walked further down the central path. The gravel crunched under my boots, the sound sharp in the quiet. I kept my hand near my gun, not because I expected trouble, but because instinct told me something wasn't right. There had always been peace here at night. Tonight, there was tension, a presence in the air I couldn't name. Ahead, the path forked near a section with family plots. Most of the stones were newer here, polished and reflective, the kind of graves that still smell faintly of fresh soil and flowers. I passed one plot and paused. Something made me stop. My flashlight flicked across the headstones, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw a movement, a shadow shifting where there shouldn't be one. I spun, beam cutting through the trees. Nothing. I laughed quietly, a short, nervous sound. Just nerves. Just me imagining things. But the feeling didn't leave. Something hovered at the edges of my vision, always just out of focus, moving with me as I walked. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn back, to leave the graveyard, but I told myself it was routine. I was being ridiculous. I continued, making my rounds. The crunch of my boots, the hum of the car's lights still on in the parking lot, the occasional rustle of leaves. These were the only sounds. But then I heard it, a low, dragging sound, soft at first, like a footstep in mud, or boots across gravel. I froze. Nothing in the cemetery should have moved. Not at this hour. Not when I was alone. My flashlight beam swung slowly across the stones, searching. Nothing. But the sound came again, closer this time, deliberate. My pulse hit my throat. I called out, trying to sound calm. Hello? Anyone here? My voice seemed to get swallowed by the night. No answer, of course. Just a dragging sound, now echoing from somewhere behind me, moving across the stones. I dared not turn fully. My mind raced, listing every rational explanation. Animal? Fallen branch? Loose stone? None of it fit the sound. The air thickened. The cold pressed harder, almost solid against my skin. I felt my heartbeat in my ears, loud and unsteady. Something shifted behind a cluster of older stones. A shadow detached itself. Or maybe it always was there, waiting. I couldn't tell. My flashlight trembled in my hand. I took a cautious step back. The shadow stretched impossibly long, and for a moment I thought I saw a figure. No details, just form, crouched low to the ground, and it moved toward me in a way that made my stomach coil. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my shaking hands. "Hey!" I called, voice firmer, trying to assert control, to claim authority. "This is a public cemetery. You shouldn't be here." No answer. Only the sound of something moving closer, soft and deliberate, dragging over gravel and dirt. My mind raced. Every horror story I'd ever heard filling the space between my ears. I tried to rationalize, try to breathe, but the hair on my neck was standing straight up. I took another step back, and then the shadow disappeared. Just like that. No noise, no trace. But the feeling remained. Heavy, pressing, watching. I told myself to calm down. It's a graveyard. Shadows stretch at night. The wind shifts. Nothing more. I continued the patrol, flashlight sweeping, eyes scanning, muscles tense. Each headstone became a potential hiding place. Each rustle of leaves sounded like movement, whispering just out of hearing. And the dragging sound, it never truly left. It echoed in my mind now, a memory that I carried even as I moved through empty paths. I passed the oldest section, where the stones leaned like tired soldiers. Here, the air felt different, heavier, older. I felt it pressing on me, like the past itself was waiting. I glanced at a stone that had been leaning for decades, and then I saw them, small markings at the base, not natural cracks, not moss or roots. Something etched there, delicate but deliberate, shapes I couldn't name, symbols that seemed to shimmer in the flashlight beam. I crouched, fingers tracing the lines. The moment my skin touched the stone, the dragging sound returned, right behind me. Closer than I expected. I spun around. Nothing, just shadows, stretching long and impossible. My pulse thundered in my ears. I felt the presence, solid and patient, waiting for me to make a mistake. I forced myself to stand, legs trembling. Routine patrol. Nothing to see here. Nothing unusual. But every instinct in me screamed that this night, this cemetery was different. Something had changed. Something had been waiting for me, lurking between the stones, and now it had my attention. I finished the round, quickening my steps, flashlight swinging, checking every path, every cluster of old graves, every corner where shadows pooled unnaturally. The dragging sound stayed with me, echoing just out of reach. Every time I thought I had left it behind, it returned, a reminder that whatever was here wasn't bound by normal rules. By the time I returned to the cruiser, the hairs on my arms were standing on end. The engine hummed a familiar tune, comforting and mechanical, but the cemetery behind me had shifted. Shadows clung to the edges of vision, shapes bending, twisting, waiting. I started the car, headlights cutting to the night, and drove toward the exit, but the feeling never left. Heavy, oppressive, patient, watching. Even now, in the office later, I can still hear it. Not loud, not in a way anyone else would notice, but in the corners of my mind, the soft drag of boots, the whisper of wind through the stones, the stretch of shadows that don't belong. Routine patrol. That's what it was supposed to be. But some nights, routine ends. Some nights, the dead are patient, and the night has its own rules. And tonight, I learned that I wasn't alone. Not really. The night felt heavier than usual. After the patrol, I thought I could shake off the tension. The cemetery, the shadows, the dragging sound that seemed impossible to explain. I told myself I was fatigued, that my mind was playing tricks, feeding off the long hours and empty roads. But when I left the station and started walking home, I realized something had followed me. It began as a faint rhythm, subtle and distant. Footsteps, not just any footsteps, but the precise cadence of my own boots on the asphalt, step for step, echoing mine. At first, I laughed quietly, thinking someone was behind me, a jogger maybe, or another night walker. I turned sharply. Nothing. The street was empty. Dim houses, shuttered windows, a single streetlight flickering. No one. I tried to dismiss it. Probably my imagination, my mind replaying the cemetery, the shadows stretching long, the unnatural sounds. But the footsteps didn't stop. They matched mine perfectly, sometimes a beat behind, sometimes in sync. I slowed down. The echo slowed. I stopped. The echo stopped. My pulse spiked. I walked faster. The steps followed. I ran. They matched my pace, my rhythm, echoing exactly as I ran. My lungs burned, my chest tightened, adrenaline screaming through every vein. I skidded to a halt, spinning around. Streetlights illuminated empty sidewalks. Nothing. Not a sound but the wind rustling leaves, the faint hum of distant traffic. And yet, I could hear them clearly. Behind me, matching every step. I tried reasoning with myself. Logic, exhaustion, some kid hiding in the shadows, maybe playing a joke. But no, the street was deserted. Empty yards, dark windows, nothing moving. And the rhythm persisted, following me, echoing in perfect synchronization. I ducked into an alley, hoping for a glimpse of whoever or whatever was there. Narrow walls, wet asphalt, the smell of garbage and decay. I paused, pressing my back against a brick, heart hammering. Footsteps, stopping, waiting. I could feel them, not behind me now, not near me, but everywhere, wrapping around my senses. A cold wind stirred the alley, carrying a faint metallic scent. My hands shook as I gripped the flashlight. I swept the beam across the walls, over the wet pavement. Nothing, no one, and yet the sound persisted. Step, 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 my own cadence, but not mine. I started walking again, slowly, carefully, trying to map where the sound came from. The alley stretched longer than it should have, curving oddly, pressing in on me. The footsteps mirrored mine exactly, step for step, pace for pace, echoing in perfect precision. I wanted to run, to escape, but fear held me rooted. Every rational thought screamed at me to leave, to call for help, but every instinct whispered that it wasn't human. I reached the other end of the alley, spilling onto a quiet street. Streetlights lined the road, casting halos of yellow, but the world felt distorted. Shadows stretched unnaturally, bending along walls, clinging to corners, and I knew the footsteps weren't just behind me. They were part of the night, a rhythm embedded in the darkness itself. I risked glancing behind. Nothing. Empty street. My own shadow stretched long, leaning with the angle of the streetlight, but the sound remained. Step, 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 matching mine exactly. It didn't waver. It didn't hesitate. It followed me, patient, deliberate, unyielding. I tried calling out, voice tight with panic. Hello? Who's there? My words bounced off the walls in empty houses. No reply, only the rhythm, precise and relentless. I stopped, listened. My own heartbeat pounded in my ears, drowning out the footsteps for a moment, and then, perfectly timed, step, step, step. The street seemed longer now, stretching further than memory served. Each step I took was mirrored. Each pause was mirrored. I tried running again, adrenaline surging, hard in my throat. The footsteps accelerated alongside me, keeping perfect rhythm. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Nothing. Empty. No one. Not a single moving shape. I ducked into a side street, hoping to lose them, hoping the geometry of the neighborhood would break the rhythm. But even here, I could hear them, precise and mocking. Step, 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 always synchronized, always there. The air grew colder, pressing against my chest, chilling my lungs. A smell followed me, wet earth, metal decay. My pulse raced. I pressed on, trying to tell myself I was imagining it. I reached my own street, familiar houses, my own yard. The porch light on, relief should have washed over me, but it didn't. The steps persisted, lingering, as if embedded into the night itself. I reached my door, fumbling for keys, flashlight shaking in my hand. Step, 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 stopped only when I did. Inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, trying to calm myself. The house was silent, normal, safe, but in the corners of my mind, I could still hear them. Step, 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 the rhythm of my own boots, echoing, repeating. I walked the rooms, lights on, checking windows, doors, closets. Nothing, and yet it didn't stop, not entirely. Just faint, almost imperceptible, lurking behind my perception. I couldn't sit still. Every creak, every settling noise set my nerves on edge. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow and hammering, blending with the phantom footsteps. I tried reasoning, trying to sleep, tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, a trick of my mind. But the memory of the cemetery, the shadows, the vanishing shapes haunted me. The footsteps weren't just sound, they were presence. Patient, deliberate, unyielding. I left the lights on, pacing the house, checking each corner, each darkened hallway. Step, step, step. Every floorboard in my own home seemed to respond. Shadows hung unnaturally. Doors that should have remained shut creaked slightly. The air was heavy, thick, pressing, and the sound resisted, echoing in the edges of perception. I tried leaving again, just to prove it to myself. Out the door, keys in hand, flashlight swinging. Step, 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 matching my pace, distance, rhythm. No one visible. Streets empty. Houses dark, but the footsteps remained. I turned corners, doubled back, ran. Nothing changed. The rhythm never faltered. Step, step, step. By the time I returned home, I realized it wasn't just outside. It followed me inside, into rooms, into the corners of my mind. I tried covering my ears, plugging my eyes, speaking aloud. Nothing could stop it. The rhythm was embedded in the night, in me, part of the air I breathed. Step, 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 a heartbeat I could not escape. I tried recording, thinking maybe if I captured it, I could prove it, understand it. The recorder picked up nothing but my own breathing and the hum of the refrigerator. Step, step, step. In my mind, it remained, echoing, constant, inescapable. I slept in fits, eyes half open, mind straining to separate reality from illusion. Every dream carried the same pattern. Walking down a street, shadowed and empty. Footsteps echoing mine, always just. Behind. No face, no shape, just presence, patient, deliberate, waiting for me to slip, to falter, to acknowledge it. By morning I was exhausted, hollowed, shaken in ways I couldn't name. And yet I knew, deep in my bones, that it hadn't ended. The footsteps weren't a prank. They weren't fatigue. They weren't imagination. Something had followed me from the cemetery, from the shadows, from the places that shouldn't exist. Step, step, step. Even now, writing this, I can hear them faintly at the edges of perception, waiting, mirroring, echoing, matching every move I make. And I know, with a certainty that chills me more than any shadow ever could, that they will never stop. The night has its own rhythm, its own patience, and I am bound to it. Step, step, step. The road was quiet that night, quieter than it had any right to be. I was driving the back roads, the headlights slicing through fog that had rolled in from the lowlands, thick and white. Routine patrol, I told myself. But the weight of the previous nights pressed against me, a lingering unease that made every shadow seem too long, every rustle too deliberate. I turned onto an overgrown path leading into the woods, somewhere I rarely patrolled, but something in my gut insisted I check it. The gravel crunched beneath my tires, the sound louder than usual in the stillness. The trees leaned inward like sentinels, their branches tangled, scraping against each other in the breeze, making the night feel alive, watching. I slowed the cruiser, peering into the darkness beyond the edges of the headlights. And then I saw it, a patch of earth that didn't belong, freshly turned, soft in a way that disturbed me immediately. I stepped out of the car, boots sinking slightly into the wet soil. The smell hit me first. Earth, yes, but sharp tang beneath it, iron-like, almost like blood. I crouched, fingers hovering over the soil. It was fresh. The dirt hadn't settled. No leaves, no debris, just dark, damp soil, pressed into the shape of a shallow rectangle. A grave, unmarked, no cross, no headstone, nothing to indicate who or what was buried here. A cold sweat ran down my back. My mind tried to rationalize. Perhaps a grave dug in error. Someone burying a pet, maybe a construction site nearby. But no, nothing matched. This place was deep in the woods, untouched, undisturbed. The silence around me wasn't natural either. The usual night sounds, crickets, distant owls, the wind through the trees, were gone. Even the fog felt heavy, pressing in around me. I leaned closer, trying to see if there was any indication of what had been buried. Small tools, scraps, footprints? Nothing. The ground was uniform, neat, deliberate. My chest tightened. I stepped back, boots crunching on loose gravel and leaves, trying to shake the unease that had settled in my gut. I turned slowly, scanning the woods with my flashlight. Shadows pulled between the trees, moving oddly, shifting when my beam passed over them. My heart hammered, throat dry. I told myself to stay calm. I was a sheriff, trained, rational, but every instinct screamed that I wasn't alone, that something had been watching me the moment I stepped onto the path. A sound, soft, almost imperceptible, made me freeze. Soil settling? A branch snapping? Or footsteps? I spun the flashlight, sweeping through the trees. Nothing moved, yet the hair on my neck stood on end. My mind began to race. What if this wasn't grave at all? What if it was a trap? Something waiting, something patient. I stepped back toward my cruiser, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. But the moment I moved, the fog seemed to thicken, curling around my legs, pressing against my chest. Shadows bent unnaturally at the edges of the light. And then I heard it, a low sound, almost a whisper, almost beneath hearing. Soil shifting, a breath, a murmur that sounded like words. I froze, flashlight trembling in my hands. Go back. No, not my voice. Not mine. Something else. A presence pressing against the edge of my perception, patient and deliberate. I took another step, and the whisper returned. You shouldn't be here. Panic rose in me. Not sudden, not explosive, but steady, cold. My stomach churned. Every horror story, every abandoned path, every forgotten legend I had read in reports or heard from deputies over the years crashed into my mind. But I couldn't leave. Something rooted me to the spot, forcing my gaze back to the grave. I took a deep breath. Rational thought, evidence gathering. That's what sheriff does. I scanned perimeter again, flashlight beam cutting through the fog, the woods pressing, shadows stretching impossibly. The grave sat in perfect silence, a dark rectangle against the pale leaves and underbrush. I dropped to one knee, running fingers over the surface. The soil was cool now, damp, and I could feel impressions in the dirt. Small marks, not human hands, not boots, claws, teeth, my imagination. My pulse thundered in my ears. I shook my head, forcing myself to think clearly. Something had been here, something recent, something deliberate. Then the movement, just at the edge of the flashlight. A shimmer, a shadow stretching, folding against the trees. I froze. It was an animal, not deer, not raccoon. Too deliberate, too aware. And then, behind me, I heard it breathing, not my own. Not the wind, a low, deliberate exhale, slow and patient, as if someone or something was crouched just beyond the beam, waiting, studying me. I turned quickly. Nothing. Empty trees. Fog, curling through the branches. The grave remained, still silent, impossibly still. My stomach twisted. The rational part of my mind whispered, "You're imagining it." The primal part screamed, "Get out." But my boots didn't move. My hands gripped the flashlight until my knuckles burned. The longer I stared at the unmarked grave, the more the edges seemed wrong. Not just freshly dug, but warped, distorted, like the soil itself was breathing, pulsing faintly under my fingers. I leaned closer, my flashlight flickering, and then I heard it clearly, a whisper from somewhere under the earth. "Stay." I jumped back, heart hammering. The light flickered again, shadows stretching unnaturally, bending. My training told me to call it in, to radio the station. But my throat went dry, and the moment I reached for the radio, static erupted. The walkie crackled, a low, guttural sound beneath the usual hiss. And then silence. I tried again. Nothing. The woods pressed in, tight and alive, breathing in the darkness. Panic threatened to overtake me. But I forced myself to calm down, to reason. Someone had dug this grave. Someone had left it here deliberately. That was all. Nothing more. I circled the grave, flashlight cutting across the soft soil. Every angle, every shadow seemed to shift when I moved. I could feel it watching me, waiting. The hairs on my arms stood on end. A branch snapped far off. I jumped, spinning the beam toward it. Nothing. Silence, heavy and oppressive, returned. Then a sound from behind, not in the distance. Right behind me, footsteps, soft, deliberate, matching my own heartbeat, almost in sync with my breaths. I spun around. Empty woods, only the grave, only the fog. But the sound continued, circling, patient, deliberate, just out of reach. I swallowed hard, fingers trembling over the flashlight. My mind raced, trying to identify a rational explanation. Trespassers? Animals? Some trick of the fog? The shadows? None of it fit. The footsteps weren't random. They mimicked me, anticipated me, and the grave, it seemed to pulse in response. Dark soil shifting faintly beneath my gaze. A shiver ran down my spine. I backed toward the cruiser slowly, eyes never leaving the grave. The footsteps followed, echoing my own. The dirt in the woods. It's a warning, a trap, a reminder that some places keep records that the living weren't meant to see. And I know, deep down, that if I go back, if I ever return to that path, I won't be walking alone. The night was thick with fog, the kind that clings to your skin and tastes like damp iron when you breathe it in. I've been driving for hours, trying to make sense of the cemetery, the unmarked grave, the footsteps that had followed me for miles. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to abandon these roads. But something deeper, some twisted curiosity, some unwillingness to accept the unknown, pushed me forward. It started with movement, not in the trees, not in the shadows that stretched too long, but on the road ahead. I saw them first as faint shapes, wisps almost drifting between the trees at the edge of fog. I slowed, squinting through the windshield. Figures, people I thought. Then I realized they weren't solid. Not really. Their edges shimmered, flickering like the light through a heat haze. I stopped the cruiser, pulse hammering. The figures stood there, motionless, not walking, not moving like living creatures should. And then, as my headlights fell on them, they vanished, gone in the space of a breath. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Nothing, only fog curling along the asphalt. Quiet, almost mocking. I tried to rationalize. Shadows, tricks of light. My exhausted mind conjuring ghosts from memories I didn't fully understand. But then one reappeared. Closer this time. Just at the edge of the fog. A form vaguely human. Tall, thin, the features impossible to discern. And yet, I felt the gaze, sharp and deliberate, pressing to the windshield, reaching inside me. I swallowed hard, throat dry, fingers gripping the wheel. My pulse thrummed like a drum in my ears. And then it spoke, not with sound, but with understanding. I knew the warning before words ever left the mouth. Don't follow. I blinked, heart hammering. Rational thought screamed, "You're imagining it." But my body froze. The fog seemed to thicken, curling along the edges of the road, pressing against the car like a living thing. Another figure appeared, this one closer, its feet hovering slightly above the ground. I could see faint hints of eyes, dark hollows, and a mouth that twisted in a way that suggested warning or threat. Go back. Stop here. I wanted to speak, to ask questions, to demand answers. My voice cracked, caught in my chest. The figure shimmered, fading again, leaving only the fog. But the warning lingered in my mind, imprinting itself like a memory I couldn't shake. I started driving slowly, headlights cutting through the mist. And then I noticed them, more figures, appearing and vanishing, each leaving a trace in my mind, impressions of words, warnings I could almost articulate but not fully grasp. They are watching. You cannot outrun it. You are marked. The road bent sharply ahead. I took it cautiously, scanning the edges, flashlight swinging from the dashboard, every muscle tense. Another figure appeared, floating slightly above the road. I could see a face this time, blurry, distorted, but the expression was clear. Urgent, desperate, warning. It stretched a hand toward me. I felt the pull, a cold pressure in my chest, like my own breath was being stolen. Turn back. The words echoed in my mind, louder than any sound the night could produce. I blinked, and the figure was gone, but the impression remained etched into my skull. My hand shook on the wheel, but I forced myself forward. I had to know. I had to see. The fog thickened further. The headlights barely pierced it, the edges of the road dissolving into gray nothingness. And then, along the shoulder, I saw more figures. They moved differently from humans, sliding across the fog, vanishing and appearing unpredictably. Some whispered warnings I could barely comprehend, fragments of phrases, broken sentences, urgent tones. Do not enter. You will regret. Leave now. I tried to speak aloud. Who are you? What do you want? My voice cracked. No answer, only the movement of the fading figures, each a pulse of fear, each a reminder that I was trespassing on something beyond understanding. One appeared directly in front of the car, standing on the asphalt, barely discernible through the fog. I slammed on the brakes, hard in my throat. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It just stood there, arms stretched toward me. The headlights illuminated nothing but mist. I squinted, and it was gone. No tire tracks, no impression on the road, nothing. Only a whisper in my mind. It knows you. My breathing came fast, shallow. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white, and forced myself to continue. Step by step, mile by mile, the figures appeared and vanished, each leaving fragments of warnings, pieces of sentences that made no logical sense but pressed into me like truths. The house, the grave, you cannot ignore. I remembered the unmarked grave. My pulse quickened, the footsteps behind me on that path, the weight of presence, the watching, and now these figures, each fleeting, each warning, each impossible. The rational part of me wanted to flee, to turn the car around and drive back toward the safety of streetlights, of civilization. But the other part, the part that couldn't let it go, pushed me forward. The fog thinned slightly as I approached the bend, and then one figure lingered, not vanishing, not flickering. A woman, faint, barely solid, standing just at the edge of the fog. Her eyes seemed to pierce through me, deep pools of understanding and sorrow. I could feel her warning pressing into me. You're too close. Stop now. The night has rules I cannot name. And these figures, fleeting and impossible, are its messengers. I can only hope their warnings mean something I can still act upon before the consequences reach beyond the fog, beyond the road, beyond me. I don't know what waits ahead. I don't know if it's real, if it's a test, if it's punishment. I only know the figures, fading and impossible, and their words etched into my mind. You are marked. Do not follow. Leave now. And I know, deep in my bones, that I cannot unsee them. The night had settled into a kind of heavy silence that pressed against my chest. The events of the past days, the cemetery, the unmarked grave, the footsteps, the fading figures, had left me frayed, jittery, every nerve taut like a wire about to snap. I told myself I was exhausted, that my mind was twisting what was real into something grotesque. But exhaustion didn't explain the pressure in the air, the unnatural stillness, the way the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should. I was walking the edge of town, past the dim streetlights, flashlight tucked in one hand, keys in the other. I didn't like leaving the cruiser, but sleep was impossible, and the silence was almost unbearable. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint smell of damp earth, and I remembered the unmarked grave. My pulse quickened, a low, insistent drum in my ears. Then it happened. I felt it before I registered what it was. A touch, light at first, brushing the back of my shoulder. A draft? I thought, spinning around. Nothing. Empty sidewalk, empty street, fog curling between the lampposts. My heart pounded. I laughed nervously. Just a breeze. That's all. A shadow brushing against me. I started walking again, faster this time, flashlight beam cutting through the mist. The feeling returned, stronger, colder, like ice against my skin, searing yet chilling at the same time. My breath, caught in my throat. I whipped around. Nothing. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get back to the safety of a locked door. But I stayed rooted. Curiosity, stubbornness, a need to know. It outweighed fear. Step by step, I continued. The streetlights flickered, as if reacting to my presence, each one casting distorted shadows that seemed to lean toward me. The touch came again, this time deliberate, resting on my shoulder. Cold, ice, sharp. I felt it press slightly, weightless yet solid. My body froze, muscles locked, and I realized my breath had stopped. Who's there? My voice cracked, small and weak. Silence. Only the wind shifting the fog. And yet, I knew I wasn't imagining it. The cold hand lingered, pressing against a muscle of my shoulder, moving slightly as if assessing me, judging me. I spun around again. Nothing. Empty street. Fog curling like smoke. My pulse thundering, mind racing. Rational thought scrambled. No one was there. No one could be. But the weight of the touch remained in memory, in sensation, in the shiver that ran from my neck down to my spine. I tried moving quickly now, walking faster, almost jogging, flashlight swinging wildly. The sensation didn't follow me physically, but it lingered, burned into the back of my mind. Every shadow seemed to twitch with life. Every lamp flickered. The air pressed down heavier with each step. And then I felt it again, not on my shoulder this time, but along my spine, fingers brushing lightly, cold so deep it burned. I stumbled, heart hammering, flashlight swinging to catch whatever it was. Nothing. Not a figure, not a movement. Only fog and the distorted glow of the streetlights. But I knew it had been there, it was there, and it wasn't human. I pressed on, steps hurried, hand shaking. The city felt wrong. Familiar streets warped into something alien. Shadows bending in impossible angles. I remembered the whispers, the warnings from the fading figures. You are marked. Do not follow. And now the cold hand, an undeniable physical presence, was reminding me that boundaries, rules, and reason meant nothing in this night. The sensation shifted again, now brushing across my face, fingers icy against my cheek, leaving a line of frost that burned the skin. I stumbled back, nearly falling, my flashlight swinging wildly. Panic surged. I turned in every direction, desperate to see, to confront, to understand. Nothing, only fog and the warped glow of streetlights. I stopped, panting, chest tight, hands trembling. The night was still, impossibly still, and yet I could feel it, pressing against me, testing me, waiting. My mind tried to rationalize. Exhaustion, hallucination, a trick of the fog. But it didn't make sense. Not the frost, not the cold, not the physical sensation that lingered even when nothing was visible. I started walking again, slowly this time, trying to control my breathing, trying to convince myself it was over. And then the voice came, whispered, soft, deliberate, not audible but embedded in my mind. You cannot escape. I froze, teeth clenched, flashlight trembling. The cold intensified, pressing against my shoulders, down my arms, along my spine. It was patient, deliberate, and aware of every movement I made. It didn't rush. It didn't chase. It was waiting for me to acknowledge it, and in that acknowledgement, I felt a deep, instinctive fear, unlike anything I had known before. Step by step, I realized I wasn't walking down a city street anymore. The fog thickened, and the outlines of familiar buildings blurred into shapes that made no sense. Shadows pulled unnaturally at the edges of the light, and I understood, with a clarity that terrified me, that the hand was guiding me, leading me somewhere, or perhaps keeping me trapped. Another touch, lighter this time, along the side of my face, brushing my temple. I spun, shouting, voice raw, body shaking. What do you want? Show yourself. Nothing. Only the fog. Only the sense of presence. Only the cold, lingering, like a memory pressed into my flesh. I forced myself to keep moving, each step heavy, deliberate. The sensation followed, brushing, testing, marking me. And in the spaces between touches, I could hear whispers, fragments of memory, shards of the warnings I'd received before. Do not enter. You are marked. It watches. The fear was no longer just mental. It was physical. Every muscle tightened. Every nerve screamed. My hands shook on the wheel as I tried to steady the flashlight. My mind raced, tracing back every step. Cemetery, grave, footsteps, fading figures. And now, the cold hand. I understood somewhere deep that these events were connected, part of a pattern I couldn't yet comprehend. I reached a street I recognized, one that led home. Relief should have washed over me, but it didn't. The cold followed me, brushing along my neck, across my arms, lingering at the edges of sensation. Shadows bent unnaturally, curling around corners, pressing against windows. I realized that nothing had ended. The presence hadn't left. It had simply shifted, waiting, patient, deliberate. At home, I locked the doors, double-checked the windows, lights on. But I couldn't shake it. The memory of the touch, the whisper, the frost burning along my skin. I could still feel it in my mind, lingering, insistent, patient. It had tested me, marked me, and I didn't know what would happen next. Sleep didn't come. Every shadow in my room, every flicker of the lights, every draft that moved across the floor made my skin crawl. The cold hand wasn't gone. It waited in the corners of perception, in the edges of memory, in the space between heartbeat and breath. It reminded me that the night has rules I cannot understand, boundaries I cannot escape. And now, writing this down, I can feel it again, cold, deliberate, patient, pressing lightly against my shoulder as if to say, you cannot hide, you cannot rest. You are mine to mark. The world feels altered, untrustworthy, warped. The cold hand has shifted reality in a way I cannot name. It is a presence, undeniable, deliberate, aware of me, and I know deep in my bones that nothing I do will sever its connection. Not sleep, not light, not distance. I don't know if it is a punishment, a test, or something beyond comprehension, but I know its touch, icy and deliberate, and I know it will return, always patient, waiting, marking me. And I understand now, with a fear I cannot shake, the night does not forgive. It does not relent, and I am marked by it. The call came in just as the last light of day faded from the sky. I was at the station, routine checks and paperwork that never seemed to end, when the radio crackled and the dispatcher's voice cut through the hum of fluorescent lights. 2 hikers missing, woods near the old ridge trail. No cell signal. No idea where they could be. I grabbed my coat, keys, and flashlight without thinking. Something about the call felt off. Not wrong. Not exactly, just heavy, like the words themselves carried weight beyond urgency. I told myself it was routine. Hikers get lost all the time. Happens every season. But the instinct in my chest told me this was different. The cruiser tires crunched over the gravel road leading into the forest. Headlights slicing through the dim, the edge of night pressing against me. Fog rolled in low, clinging to the trees like a living thing, making the world blur and shimmer. I tried the radio again. Nothing, just static. I frowned. Maybe a bad signal in the valley. Maybe something else. I parked near the trailhead, the smell of wet pine and soil filling my senses. I stepped out, boots sinking slightly into damp leaves, flashlight cutting through the creeping darkness. The air was too still, too quiet. The forest should have sounded alive. Birds calling their last cries, leaves rustling, the distant hum of insects, but it was eerily silent. I followed the trail, flashlight sweeping side to side, trying to catch any movement, any sign of the hikers. Then I heard it, a sound that froze me mid-step. Low, unnatural, reverberating through the trees. Not animal, not human. A low, rhythmic thrum, like a pulse in the earth itself, echoing between the trunks. My hand tightened on the flashlight, pulse quickening. I called out, "This is Sheriff Lawson. Hikers, can you hear me?" My voice felt small, swallowed by the darkness. The sound stopped for a moment. Silence. Then it returned closer, shifting in tone, bending strangely around me. It wasn't just noise. It was deliberate and aware. I moved cautiously, every sense heightened, heart hammering. The trail split into multiple paths, none marked. I picked one at random, telling myself it didn't matter. I had to find them. But the sound followed, shifting as I moved, never steady, always adjusting, like it was tracking me, testing me. Branches snapped behind me. I spun, flashlight swinging. Nothing, only fog curling through the underbrush. Shadows stretching impossibly. I tried to convince myself it was just deer, maybe a fox, something natural. But the rhythm of the thrum didn't match anything living I'd ever known. Then I heard a voice, or something like a voice, whispering low, barely audible, words I couldn't understand, syllables that twisted unnaturally in my ears. A language I didn't know, but somehow felt familiar, like an echo from a dream. My pulse hammered, every hair on my arm standing straight. I whispered back, almost instinctively, "Hello? Are you okay?" Silence. Then the thrum shifted again, rising, falling, undulating in a way that made the ground beneath me feel alive. I stopped walking. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. But I couldn't. Not yet. They were out there somewhere. I had to find them. The fog thickened, wrapping around the trees, pressing against my chest, making every step feel heavier. My flashlight caught something up ahead, a faint glimmer between the trunks. I hurried forward, heart hammering, and found footprints. Not fresh, but recent. Hiker boots, small and narrow, leading deeper into the forest. Relief and dread collided in my chest. I followed. The whispering sound returned, closer now, weaving through the trees, almost following the footprints. My stomach turned. Something about it wasn't natural. The rhythm of it, the way it moved, wasn't random. It was deliberate, aware, patient. I pressed forward, gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles ached. Then I saw movement. Quick, blurred shapes darting between the trunks. 2 figures? I called out again, voice shaking, trying to mask the fear. Hey, hikers! It's Sheriff Lawson. No response, only the rustle of leaves, the eerie rhythm of that unnatural thrum. The figures appeared again, fleeting, too fast to focus, then vanished. I cursed under my breath, forcing myself to stay calm, rational. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they had heard me. Maybe it wasn't them at all. My gut twisted. I pressed on, deeper into the forest, every step heavier than the last. The shadows seemed to shift unnaturally around me, stretching and bending against the light. I could feel eyes on me, though I saw nothing. The whispering grew, fragments of words brushing against my ears, teasing meaning I couldn't grasp. Leave, not safe. I stopped suddenly, flashlight beam catching something on the ground. A backpack, one of the hikers. Open, content scattered. Nothing moved except for the wind, or so I told myself. No footprints leading away, no signs of struggle, just abandoned. My stomach churned, unease curling into terror. I called out again, but my voice sounded small, swallowed by the darkness. And then I heard it, not the thrum this time. A soft, deliberate crunching behind me. Footsteps, slow, careful, but heavy, deliberate, matching my own pace, almost synchronized with my heartbeat. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the fog. Nothing, only trees, only shadows. And yet, I knew it wasn't empty. I walked faster. The footsteps echoed, perfectly matching mine. Every step I took, every breath, every movement, followed, mirrored, measured. My mind screamed at me to run, to turn back, but the trail, the backpack, the thought of the missing hikers rooted me to the path. Branches snapped closer this time, sharp, sudden. I froze. The whispering returned, closer, surrounding me, circling me. I couldn't tell which direction it came from. I shouted, voice cracking, "I'm a sheriff. If you're here, answer me." Silence. Then a single, sharp sound, a twig snapping underfoot. Slow, deliberate, someone or something moving with me, always just at the edge of perception. The fog pressed tighter, wrapping around me, damp and cold. My flashlight flickered, heart hammering. I adjusted the beam, scanning every shadow, every tree. Nothing. I forced myself to continue, following the footprints deeper into the forest. The whispering became more coherent, fragments of words brushing my ears, pressing into my mind. I could almost make sense of them. Turn back, lost danger. The trees grew denser, closer, pressing in. The thrum rose again, low and insistent, vibrating in my chest. My flashlight caught something glinting in the distance, a metal object half buried in the dirt. I hurried over, heart hammering, and found a broken compass. The needle spun wildly, never settling. The air around me chilled and the fog thickened, curling into shapes that didn't belong, bending unnaturally around the trunks. I swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. Rational thought told me it was just equipment damage in the forest. My instincts told me it was a warning, a sign, something unnatural marking my path. The thrum intensified, almost like a heartbeat now, slow and deliberate, resonating through the earth, echoing in my skull. I pressed on, following the footprints that seemed to vanish and reappear, leading me deeper into the fog-shrouded woods. The whispering continued, teasing, warning. shaping fear into knowledge I couldn't fully grasp. Shadows stretched impossibly. Figures darted just beyond the flashlight, vanishing before I could focus. And then I saw them, not the hikers, not fully. Shapes, faint, almost transparent, moving between the trees. Glimpses of human form, faces blurred and distorted. And they weren't walking naturally, sliding, floating almost, their movements deliberate, slow, unnatural. One turned, and I felt its gaze before I saw a face. Hollow, dark, impossibly old, pressing into my mind with warning. Leave now. Danger waits. I staggered back, heart hammering, flashlight trembling in my hand. The fog swirled, thickening, pressing against me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs refused, rooted the path, to the footprints, to the thought of the missing hikers. Step by step, the figures vanished, leaving only the sound of whispering and the unnatural thrum vibrating through the ground. I called out again, voice breaking. Hikers, if you can hear me, respond. Only silence, and the feeling, deeper now, primal, that I was being watched, followed, measured, tested. The forest was no longer just a forest. It had become alive, aware, deliberate, pressing it on me with each heartbeat. I didn't know how long I stood there, flashlight trembling, breath ragged, chest tight. I only knew that the woods had rules I didn't understand, that the figures, the sounds, the whispers, the thrum. They were marking me, warning me, shaping the forest into something beyond reason. And I knew, deep down, that the hikers weren't truly lost. Not in the sense I understood. They had wandered into something alive, something aware, something patient and deliberate. And now, by following the trail, I had stepped into it too. The forest didn't end where the trail stopped. That much became clear the moment I pushed past the faint footprints and deeper into the fog. The path vanished under fallen leaves, roots, and shadows that seemed thicker than they had any right to be. The further I walked, the heavier the air felt, as if the night itself were pressing against my chest, squeezing, testing me. I kept my flashlight sweeping side to side, more out of habit than hope. The dim beam cut jagged lines into the mist, revealing trunks slick with moisture and the occasional twisted branch that reached like a claw. But it wasn't the branches or the roots that made my stomach knot. It was a feeling of being watched, sharp, deliberate, insistent. I had walked this forest countless times, chasing reports of lost hikers, poachers, or stray deer. Never had it felt like this. And then I saw them, eyes, hundreds of them, or so it felt, glowing faintly, scattered in the darkness between the trees. Red, amber, green, shifting like coals in a dying fire. I froze mid-step, flashlight shaking slightly in my grip. The instinct to run clawed at my mind, but I stayed, every muscle taut, heart hammering. They didn't move at first, just watched, patient, aware, eyes scattered across the black undergrowth. Some of the edges of my vision, others peering from higher branches, hollow and deliberate. I couldn't tell how many. Not entirely human, I realized. Not entirely animal. Something else. Something older, patient, intelligent. Show yourself, I said, voice surprisingly steady. Or at least I hoped it was steady. The fog muffled my words, swallowing them almost before they left my mouth. Nothing moved. The eyes blinked, shifted slightly, like water disturbed by wind. I tried to rationalize. Deer? Owls? Coyotes? My own imagination playing tricks after the thrum, the whispers, the abandoned backpack. But rational thought couldn't explain the way the eyes seemed to follow me, angled toward me deliberately, aware of every movement I made. I took a cautious step forward. The eyes reacted, a ripple, subtle but undeniable, spreading across the darkness. My pulse spiked. I swallowed, trying to force down the fear, reminded myself of training, of procedure. Locate the missing hikers. Stay calm. Stay aware. But calm felt impossible. Awareness felt like it had betrayed me, making me notice every movement in the shadows, every twitch, every slight gleam of light. Another step, and a pair of eyes moved independently, breaking from the cluster, floating closer, not through any path I could see. They hovered, precise, deliberate, and then I heard it. Breath, low, wet rasping, almost behind me, almost everywhere. I spun, flashlight cutting through the fog. Nothing. Only trees, only shadows, only eyes. Watching, waiting. I forced myself to take another step. The flashlight caught something. Movement in the undergrowth. Not human, not animal. Something tall, slender, impossibly thin, crouched low between the roots. It froze when it noticed me, eyes glowing faintly from the darkness, reflecting back like dying embers. My chest tightened, my breath caught. I wanted to run, but my feet refused. I had to know. I had to see. The creature, or whatever it was, didn't move naturally. It shifted, slides rather than walks, light on its toes yet silent as the fog itself. I saw more shapes in the distance, glimpses of limbs or faces, indistinct but deliberate, and they weren't scattered randomly. They were positioned like hunters, like sentinels, watching every step I took. I forced myself to call out, "Hikers, can you hear me?" My voice cracked under the weight of the silence. A branch snapped somewhere behind me. I spun. Nothing. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move aside. They simply waited. A cold sweat ran down my spine. The hairs on my arms and neck bristled. My mind raced. I remembered the backpack, the footprints, the whispers, and now this. These eyes, glowing in deliberate patience, scattered like stars across the black forest. Something here wasn't just observing. It was judging, testing, calculating. I took another step forward. The nearest eyes, amber this time, followed with uncanny precision. And then, slowly, they began to shift. Not moving toward me, not yet, but aligning, spreading through the forest like a tide. My flashlight flickered in my trembling hands. Shadows stretched impossibly, bending around the trunks, elongating, warping. I remember the thrum, the heartbeat in the ground. It returned now, low and insistent, synchronized with my own pulse. The eyes blinked, or at least I thought they blinked, in perfect rhythm with it. I felt it in my chest, in my bones. The forest itself was alive. The eyes weren't just watching. They were the forest. Branches snapped again, louder, closer. I stumbled back, flashlight catching movement at the edge of my vision. Figures shifted, thin and elongated. Faces blurred into the darkness. One turned slowly and I felt its gaze, not just eyes, but awareness pressing into my skull. Knowledge I wasn't meant to hold. Leave. The word wasn't spoken aloud, but etched into my mind like frost on glass. I shivered. The eyes shifted in response. Some retreating, some pressing closer. A pattern emerged, deliberate, predatory. I realized I was no longer leading the search. I was part of it, an intruder, observed, measured, tested. I tried moving cautiously backward. The eyes followed, always the nearest pair, sometimes more. I felt a soft breeze against my cheek, or something colder, and realized I could hear the whispers again, not in words this time, more like half-formed thoughts, pressing against my skull, brushing at memory. You shouldn't be here. Don't follow. Danger waits. Branches bent without wind. Fog thickened into walls around me. The eyes scattered through the darkness, glowing faintly, shifting deliberately. Shapes moved between them, tall, thin, crouched, sliding, not walking. Every step I took, every breath, every heartbeat felt mirrored, anticipated, measured. I tried speaking again. "Hikers, stay calm. I'm coming for you." My voice sounded weak, swallowed by fog. The whispering pressed harder, shards of words cutting like ice through my thoughts. Marked. Intruder. Cannot leave. I stumbled, flashlight catching something ahead. A faint trail of crushed leaves, deeper footprints, but no hikers, just more evidence of movement. The shapes moved with it, never fully visible, always just at the edge of the light, just out of reach. The eyes above glowed brighter, not threatening, not yet, but deliberate, watching, patient. Another step, and the nearest pair of eyes followed me into the clearing. They hovered, reflecting the light, unblinking, aware. I noticed subtle details, the spacing, the coordination, the way shadows twisted unnaturally in their presence. This wasn't random. It was deliberate, ancient, and I was intruding on something far older than the missing hikers. A cold rush of air pressed against my chest. I blinked and realized the clearing had shifted. The fog thickened into walls. Trees bent unnaturally, aligning like sentinels. The eyes were everywhere now, embedded in the dark, in the fog, in the branches, some low, some high, all watching, all aware. I tried moving toward the footprints again, forcing myself forward. My pulse matched the thrum beneath the forest floor. Every step echoed. Every breath drawn felt heavy, thick with the awareness of those eyes, following, observing, measuring. Shapes moved between the trunks, slender, elongated, faces blurred, features shifting like smoke. I called out again, voice raw, desperate. Hikers, respond. Nothing. Only the whispers, shards of memory, warnings, fragments that press against comprehension. Leave now. Cannot return. Danger waits. And then one pair of eyes moved closer than the rest, directly at me. I froze, heart hammering. I could feel it, not just looking, but penetrating, probing, judging. My mind screamed at me to retreat, to flee, but my legs refused. I was rooted, trapped by awareness, by anticipation, by the weight of the forest pressing down. I blinked. The eyes blinked. I staggered back, flashlight swinging wildly, catching shapes just beyond clarity. Figures crouched, sliding, shifting between the trunks. Faces blurred, almost human, almost familiar. And I knew they weren't meant to be seen fully. The forest was alive, aware, deliberate, and now it had marked me as part of it. The whispers grew louder, echoing inside my head. Words I couldn't fully grasp, feelings I couldn't name. Fear, warning, inevitability. I turned, flashlight beam catching more eyes. Red, amber, green, glowing faintly, scattered across the fog. The thrum beneath me rose, resonating in my chest, in my bones, in my skull. Step by step, I realized I wasn't just searching for hikers anymore. I was navigating a living, watching entity, something older than the earth beneath me, more aware than any human mind could comprehend. The eyes moved with intention, guiding me, warning me, measuring me. And in that realization, I understood with sudden clarity. Leaving the forest would not end the awareness. I was marked. I was known. The fog thickened into a wall ahead. The eyes blinked in unison, low, deliberate, almost satisfied. I could feel their presence pressing into my mind, threading through memory, observation, understanding. I swallowed hard, flashlight trembling. I was alive, but the forest had made sure of one thing. It would never forget me. I didn't know what awaited deeper within. I didn't know if the hikers were still alive, or they had been absorbed into this living, breathing darkness. All I knew was that the forest watched, waited, and remembered, and those eyes, glowing faintly among the trees, would never let me forget. The forest seemed endless, stretching on in all directions, thick with fog and shadow. I followed the trail as best I could, guided by fading footprints, and an instinct that screamed at me to keep moving. The missing hikers were out there somewhere, or at least something was, and I couldn't leave them behind. Not after seeing those eyes in the trees. Not after feeling the forest itself watching and judging. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time was hard to measure in this place. The fog rolled low, thick and damp, and the shadows shifted unnaturally with every step I took. The thrum beneath the forest floor pulsed with a steady rhythm, syncing with my heartbeat. Every nerve in my body was on edge. And then, through the mist, I saw it. The cabin. It shouldn't have been there. Not on any map I'd ever seen. Not near this trail. Not tucked in these woods. Yet there it was, a squat wooden structure, windows dark and empty, roof sagging, paint peeling like dead skin. Smoke didn't rise from the chimney, but the smell of damp wood and decay hung in the air, thick and oppressive. I hesitated at the threshold. My flashlight beam quivered as I raised it, scanning the exterior. Something about the place felt deliberate, not abandoned by accident, but left to wait, something that had been waiting for me, or for anyone who dared follow the trail this far. The door creaked into my hand. As I pushed it open, dust billowed out, motes dancing in the flashlight's beam, and the air inside was colder, heavier than the forest outside. I stepped in slowly, boots crunching against debris-covered floorboards. The smell of mildew, rot, and something else. Iron, copper, old blood hit me full force. The room was empty, yet it felt full. Shadows clung to the corners, stretching and moving with the beam of my flashlight. The walls were lined with old, cracked panels, but on closer inspection, marks appeared. Words scratched into the wood. Do not follow. They are watching. I froze, knuckles tightening around the flashlight. The handwriting was jagged, desperate, but deliberate. A warning left by someone or something that had been here before. I moved further inside. Every step made the floorboards groan underfoot. A table stood in the middle of the room, covered in dust and scattered papers. I crouched, sifting through them. Old maps, faded photographs of people I didn't recognize, their eyes hollow, gazes vacant, as though something had stripped the life from them before the camera even clicked. Names scratched in the margins. Hikers, travelers, a few sheriff deputies from decades past. The dates, years, decades apart, suggest a pattern. This cabin had been a witness to disappearances, to those lost and swallowed by the forest. A sudden creak behind me made my pulse spike. I swung the flashlight around, scanning every corner, every doorway. Nothing moved, only shadows, only the thrum steady beneath my feet. I told myself it was imagination, fatigue, the echo of too many missing persons and too many unseen eyes in the woods. But I knew better. Something was here. I rose slowly, moving toward the back of the cabin. A doorway led to a small kitchen, rusted sink and cabinets warped with age. Another set of markings on the wall caught my eye. This time, words and symbols intertwined. Do not look. Leave while you can. They see you. The symbols weren't familiar, yet they resonated somehow, like a warning encoded in instinct rather than reason. I could feel eyes on me. Not just the glowing eyes in the trees anymore. Not just the shapes in the fog. Something had followed me into the cabin. Something patient, deliberate, aware of every movement. My flashlight flickered. I cursed under my breath, adjusting the beam. I reached the far side of the cabin. A small bedroom, bed frame rusted and mattress long decayed. On the wall above the bed, more writing. You will not find them. Only yourself remains. I pressed my hand to the wood. Cold, ice cold, as though the forest had seeped into the very structure of the cabin, marking it with a memory of its victims. The air shifted suddenly. I felt it before I heard it, a low, deliberate movement, like something sliding across the floor just beyond the edge of the light. My flashlight beam caught nothing, but my heart pounded like a drum. Breath shallow, I whispered to myself, I need to see. I need to know. A drawer stood slightly ajar. I opened it slowly. Inside, a journal. Pages yellowed brittle. The entries were frantic, scrawled in the same jagged style as the warnings. Descriptions of hikers disappearing. Strange noises, whispers, eyes in the darkness. One entry read, They are patient. They wait. We cannot leave once seen. Another, The forest watches. The cabin listens. We are not alone. I sat on the decayed mattress, hands trembling, flipping through the pages. Each entry pressed a deeper weight into my chest. Each were a reminder that the hikers I was searching for had been here, had left traces, and yet had vanished. The cabin itself felt alive, aware, pressing its history into me, reminded me that the forest reach was long and patient. A sudden noise made me snap upright. Floorboards creaked behind me, heavy, deliberate, synchronized with my heartbeat. I swung the flashlight, beam cutting across the room. Nothing, yet I felt it. Eyes in the darkness, watching, following, pressing into my mind. I swallowed hard, forcing breath into my lungs. I stood, moving toward the door, feeling the cabin shrink, folding around me like it wanted to trap me. Every corner seemed to bend with shadows. I could hear whispers, faint but distinct, brushing at the edges of thought. Marked. You are marked. Leave now. Stepping outside. I tried to convince myself the worst was over. The fog outside pressed against me, damp and chilling. The trees loomed like silent sentinels. And yet, I could feel the cabin's presence behind me, pulling at me, imprinting itself into my memory, ensuring that I would not forget. I shined the flashlight back at the cabin. Windows dark, empty, the structure appeared still, silent, harmless, but I knew better. The markings, a journal, the photographs, they were proof that this place was more than wood and nails. It was a witness, a trap, a marker for those foolish enough to enter. As I walked back toward the trail, the fog thickened, curling around my legs, cold and persistent. I could feel eyes again, scattered through the trees, following me as I retreated. Not just deer or wildlife. Something patient, something aware, something that remembered every soul that had come here before me. I kept moving, never daring to look over my shoulder. Every step felt like a negotiation, a careful balance between bravery and caution. The trail wound and twisted, the forest pressing in tighter. Yet the cabin loomed in my memory, its presence lingering like a shadow on my mind. I thought of the hikers, of those long vanished, of the eyes, the whispers, the thrum beneath the earth. And I knew that the cabin was only one part of the forest's patience. A single note in a symphony of unseen awareness. Something out there, watching, waiting, deciding who would leave and who would be claimed. When I finally emerged from the trees onto the open road, the fog still hung low, clinging to the edges of the forest. Headlights of my cruiser appeared ahead. Relief should have washed over me, but it didn't. The memory of the cabin burned into me, words scratched into wood, eyes that followed from the darkness, whispers threading through my mind. I knew with certainty that I had not left the forest unmarked. The cruiser engine hummed, tires crunching over gravel, lights cutting through the low mist. I drove slowly, eyes darting toward the edge of the forest, flashlight beam from my own patrol cutting briefly into the shadows. And I realized the truth. The hikers may never return. The forest may have taken them, folded them into its will. And I had glimpsed it, too, seen its patience, felt its deliberate awareness. I would remember the cabin, the words, the photographs, the journal, and the eyes. Always the eyes. Watching, patient, waiting. Even now, in the light of my office, writing this down, I feel it. Not a touch, not a presence, but the knowledge. The cabin is alive. The forest is aware. And nothing that enters fully ever truly leaves. It was just past midnight when the first alarm went off. I was alone in the station, the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights keeping me company, along with the low murmur of the AC. Just another routine night shift, or so I told myself. But when the red lights flashed and the buzzer screamed through the building, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a routine alarm. I knew that before I even reached for the console. The alarm panel flickered, lights jumping erratically. Nothing on the monitors made sense. Doors that should have been closed were marked as ajar. Windows that were locked showed open. Cameras displayed static for a moment, then flickered back to life, always catching shadows where there shouldn't be any. I rubbed my eyes, chalking it up to fatigue. Midnight shifts were killers for your mind, but deep down I knew this was a fatigue. I walked down the hall, flashlight in hand, checking doors and cameras. Every step echoed unnaturally, like the building itself had a voice. The alarm stopped for a brief moment, only to restart louder, sharper, more insistent. Each time the buzzer screamed, my head throbbed and the lights stuttered. I tried to ignore the sense of being watched, but it pressed at my mind relentlessly. I reached the dispatch office. Monitors lined the wall, static blurring the images from the outside world. And then I saw it. On the feed, the front doors appeared wide open, even though I had just checked them. My hands trembled as I approached. Try to reconcile what I knew with what I saw. The doors were solid, locked, impossible to move without a key. Yet there it was, on the screen, swinging slowly, silently like a signal. A cold draft brushed my neck. I spun around. Nothing. Empty hallways, fluorescent lights flickering. The sense of presence lingered, pressing on my back, pressing on my skull. I tried the radio. Static. Then a whisper, faint, half-heard, almost nothing. Not safe. I froze, heart pounding. I repeated out loud. Not safe? Who's there? Only the hum of electronics replied. The phones rang suddenly. All of them. And when I answered, silence. Not the usual deadline silence. This was heavy, oppressive, a vacuum of sound that seemed to carry weight. And beneath it, breathing, my own, echoing strangely, distorted, deeper, heavier than normal. My grip on the receiver tightened until my knuckles ached. Then came the lights. They flickered violently, stuttering like a heartbeat. Shadows stretched across the walls, impossible angles, bending against the contours of the office. I turned slowly, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, but the shadows moved independently, sliding across the walls like dark water, brushing corners that should have remained solid. The alarms reset again. This time, a voice accompanied the sound, distorted, mechanical, and yet eerily human. "Leave now." I spun toward the panel, trying to silence it, but the buttons melted under my touch, or at least that's what it felt like. My fingers met nothing but smooth plastic, unresponsive. The voice repeated clearer this time. "Not safe. Leave now." Panic prickled at the edges of my mind, but I forced myself to stay calm. Rational thought, procedures, standard operating response. I moved through the station, flashlight illuminating the familiar rooms now warped by shadows and light. Every corner held movement. Every doorway seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like a living thing. I reached the evidence room. Nothing should have been out of place, but the door was cracked open slightly. My stomach churned. I pushed it gently, stepping inside. Papers and boxes were scattered, drawers pulled out, not in a natural disorder. No, the mess had intent, direction. It was as if something had sifted through the room, examining, selecting, watching me. And then I heard it, a soft laugh, echoing somewhere deep in the station. Not human, not entirely. Somewhere between a memory of laughter and a shadow of sound. It bounced off the walls, around corners impossible to pinpoint. I called out, voice trembling. "Who's there? Show yourself." Only silence answered. Only the low hum of electronics that had begun to pulse with a rhythm matching my heartbeat. The alarms went silent, abruptly. I let out a shaky breath. Relief, maybe, or just a pause. And then the lights went out completely. The building dropped into darkness. So complete it felt like the walls themselves had vanished. My flashlight cut a thin line to black, but even it seemed dimmer, struggling against a presence that resisted illumination. I felt it then. Not a touch, not a shadow. Awareness, pressing into my back, coiling in my chest, wrapping around my mind. The station was no longer just a building. It had become a living thing, breathing, aware, observing. Every monitor, every wire, every door was part of it, and I was inside. The radio sparked to life. Static at first, then whispers. Names. Names I knew. Officers long retired, missing hikers. Unknown faces. Each whisper threaded into my thoughts, brushing memories and fears, unraveling the edges of my control. "You're not alone," watched inside. The voice of the station, or the entity that had claimed it, pressed against me relentless. I stumbled back, trying to reach the exit. The hallways twisted impossibly, leading nowhere familiar. Doors I had just passed now opened into rooms I hadn't seen. The familiar layout of the station was gone, replaced with corridors that bent and looped, stairwells leading nowhere, shadowed corners that moved with intent. Panic surged. My flashlight wavered, and then came the alarms again. Not from the panels this time. From everywhere. Buzzers, bells, speakers, phones, all screaming at once. The sound wasn't just loud. It pressed into my chest, vibrating through bone, shaking teeth, forcing me to my knees. Over it, the whispers shouted in unison, "Leave, leave, leave." My hand shook as I pressed against my ears, but the sound didn't stop. It was inside, outside, above, beneath. The building itself had become a singular presence, overwhelming, aware, intent. I tried to remember breathing, tried to hold on to reason, tried to remind myself it was a station, wood and concrete, fluorescent lights and wires. But logic slipped like water. The laughter returned, closer, inside my skull now, not echoing in the halls. I could feel it behind my eyes, crawling over my thoughts. A shadow brushed past my shoulder. Cold, not wind, not air. Something alive, deliberate, aware. I spun, flashlight catching the faintest movement. Indistinct, dark in the dark, shifting unnaturally. The alarm stopped as suddenly as it had started. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. My breathing roared in my ears. The monitors flickered once, then black. Then a single word appeared on the central panel, in jagged, almost human handwriting. Watched. I stumbled to the main door. My fingers touched the handle. Ice cold. The station seemed to resist my leaving, walls pressing inward, corridors tightening, shadows bending to block the way. Every instinct screamed to run, to escape, but something deeper, older, whispered against it. I needed to know, to see. Footsteps echoed behind me. Not mine, not familiar. Heavy, deliberate, pace to match my heartbeat. I didn't dare look. I didn't need to. Awareness pressed at my back. Eyes, countless, unseen but known, watched every nerve, every pulse, every breath. I finally reached the front doors. Locked. Of course they were locked. I fumbled with keys, trembling hands barely registering the motion. The whispering rose, threading through my mind. Leave before it knows you. The doors opened with a reluctant groan. Outside, the night was thick, fog rolling low, stretching across the parking lot. The building loomed behind me, solid, silent. Yet I could feel it, like a pulse, like awareness, like the memory of eyes that never closed. I turned toward my cruiser, heart hammering, but I could still hear it. The whispering, the laughter, the thrum inside the walls of the station. I drove away slowly, headlights cutting through the fog. Every turn, every glance toward the station pressed memories deeper into my chest. Words scratched into air I couldn't see. Shadows bending in impossible ways. Whispers threading through the wind. I knew that leaving didn't end it. The station had marked me, observed me, watched me, and in the dead of night, I realized the alarms weren't signals. They weren't malfunctions. They were invitations. Calls from a presence older than me, older than the station, alive, aware, patient. And now I had answered. Even now, sitting at home, lights on, doors locked, I can hear it. Not the alarms exactly, not fully, but the memory of sound, the shadow of presence, the awareness that the station watches, that it knows, that it waits, patient. And I know if I ever return, I will not be alone. The next alarm came without warning, cutting through the quiet of the station like a scream. I had barely had time to process the chaos from the previous night before it happened again. My stomach churned as I approached the source, a room at the far end of the hall, one that had been sealed for decades. A storage room on the blueprints, long unused, long ignored. But tonight, the panel blinked red, a silent pulse in the darkness. I hesitated at the door. The metal frame looked ordinary enough. Old paint chipped at the edges. The lock rusted slightly, but the air around it was heavy, thick, almost electric. I could feel it before I touched it. A presence, waiting, patient. I gripped the handle. Cold. I knew, as soon as my hand met the metal, that whatever had triggered this alarm wasn't mechanical. The lock didn't resist. It turned smoothly, almost too smoothly, and the door creaked open. Darkness spilled out, thick and waiting, as though the room itself exhaled. My flashlight swept the interior. Dust-covered shelves, boxes stacked haphazardly, the detritus of decades of neglect. But something was off. Objects seemed shifted, not random, arranged, intentional. I stepped inside slowly, boots crunching on the cracked tiles. Every instinct screamed that I shouldn't be here, but my curiosity, or maybe obligation, pushed me forward. The room smelled of mildew and rust, like everything had been left to rot. Yet beneath that, a hint of something metallic, iron, blood. My pulse quickened. The first clue of the presence revealed itself in the form of marks on the floor. Footprints, not human, slender, elongated, dragging slightly, leading to a corner of the room that seemed darker than the rest. I followed, flashlight trembling. Each step echoed unnaturally, though I knew the floorboards weren't that hollow. The shadows bent as I approached, stretching unnaturally, wrapping the corners of the room like fingers. Then I saw it, on the wall, near the back, words scratched into the plaster. We watch. We wait. You are seen. Jagged letters. Desperate but deliberate. Someone had been here before me. Or something. My stomach turned. The sense of being observed thickened, coiling around my chest. I turned slowly. The air seemed to shift behind me, heavy and deliberate. My flashlight caught movement at the edge of the beam, a shadow darker than the black around it, twitching, impossible to place. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. It was too quiet, too patient. And I knew it wasn't just imagination. The presence had made itself known. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards. At first, I thought it was the building settling, an old station creaking under its own weight. But the vibration matched my heartbeat, like it was aware, syncing with me. I froze, listening. The hum deepened, a resonance that wrapped around my skull, threading through my thoughts, pressing against the edges of reason. Boxes rattled softly. A single shelf shifted, silently, with no one there. My flashlight flickered. I cursed under my breath, adjusting the beam, trying to rationalize. Nothing made sense. Every object, every shadow, every whisper of movement suggested intent. The room wasn't empty. It was waiting, watching, aware. I moved closer to the corner. Footprints led to a crate, overturned and broken. Inside, remnants of papers, old files, maps, photographs. I lifted them carefully, heart hammering, names, faces, dates, all tied to missing people, some of them officers, some civilians. The patterns were too precise, too deliberate. Whoever, or whatever, had been here was cataloging, observing, tracking, waiting. A cold draft brushed my shoulder. I spun, flashlight slicing through the darkness. Nothing. Empty room. Boxes, shelves, walls. And yet, the feeling of being watched intensified, pressing into my chest, threading through my mind. Whispers curled along the edges of perception. Not words at first, only fragments. Memories. Thoughts not my own. Leave, leave, leave. I stumbled back, heart racing. My hand hit another shelf, knocking down a stack of papers. The rustle echoed unnaturally, bouncing off walls and ceiling, magnified, distorted. And then I saw the footprint again, elongated, dragging, leading toward me now, not away. The sense of eyes, countless and unseen, settled across my shoulders, down my spine. I wasn't alone. I called out, voice cracking. Who was there? Silence. The shadows didn't shift. Yet awareness pressed against me, like a living thing, threading through the air, brushing against my mind. The hum in the floorboards intensified, vibrating through bone, through thought, until it felt like the room itself was breathing inside me. My flashlight caught something moving in the corner. Slow, deliberate, not human. I blinked, and it was gone, swallowed by darkness. I convinced myself it had been a trick of the light, fatigue, imagination, but I knew better. The room had marked me, observed me, cataloged me like the others before me. I moved toward the door, but hesitation stopped me. Something compelled me to stay, to see, to understand. Shadows slid along the walls as I lifted a box, revealing more photographs. Faces of the missing, eyes hollow, vacant, unblinking. And then a hand, pale, thin, reaching from beneath the crate. I froze, flashlight beam trembling. But when I focused, nothing was there. Only the shadows, lingering where it should have been. The hum dropped to a low, insistent thrum, echoing in my chest. My pulse raced in time with it. I realized then that the room wasn't merely haunted. It was alive, aware, deliberate. Every movement, every shadow, every object shifted with intent. And I was intruding on something far older, far patient. I backed away slowly, heart hammering. The whispers returned, sharper this time. You see us. You cannot leave. Not yet. My skin prickled, hair standing on end. I stumbled over debris, boxes toppling, paper scattering. Yet the room remained unervingly still, patient, observing, aware. I forced myself to leave, moving toward the doorway. The shadows twisted with me, elongating, bending around corners, brushing close enough to feel the chill of air that wasn't air. I reached for the handle. Cold, ice cold. My hand trembled. I turned it. The door creaked open just enough. Beyond, the hallways stretched, familiar yet wrong. Hallways I had walked countless times, now twisted and warped, as though the station itself bent to accommodate the presence. I glanced back. The locked room seemed empty, quiet, inert, but I knew better. It was patient, watching, waiting. Every object, every shadow, every whisper of sound carried intent, memory, awareness. It had been here before me. It had cataloged the missing, and it had marked me. I stepped into the hallway. The air pressed against me, heavy with the memory of the room. I could still feel the elongated shadows brushing at the edges of perception, the whispers threading through my thoughts, the hum resonating in my bones. I shook my head, trying to clear it. Logic, procedure, reality. Nothing seemed to hold. I tried to report it over the radio. Static, then a single distorted word. Seen. My stomach sank. The room had followed me, in memory, in awareness. Threading into the station, into me, I could feel it pressing against the boundaries of reason, reminding me that it was patient, deliberate, and relentless. As I moved through the station, lights flickering above, I realized the full weight of it. The missing, the rooms, the shadows, they were all part of the same pattern. A presence, older than the building, aware, deliberate. And now it had me cataloged too. Observed, noted, patient. Waiting. I left the station eventually, into the night air, cold and damp. The fog lay low over the lot, curling around the edges of the building. I glanced back once. The lights inside flickered, shadows twisting behind the windows, as though the room itself were breathing, alive, aware. I drove home slowly, headlights cutting through the mist. The whispers, the hum, the awareness of eyes unseen press against my mind. I couldn't shake it. The locked room had marked me, observed me, followed me, and I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. Even now, hours later, I can still feel it. Not a touch, not a presence, but a knowledge, the awareness of the room, patient, deliberate, waiting. It is inside my thoughts, threaded into memory. And if I return, if I ever step back inside the station, I will not be alone. The locked room waits. Always. Patient. Watching. I found the tapes in the evidence room. They were tucked behind a stack of old files, covered in dust, unlabeled except for a single date scrawled in black marker. Years ago. Decades maybe. Something about them called to me, though I didn't know why. A sense of urgency, like the force of the station itself, had pressed them into my hands, insisting that I see. I hesitated, fingers brushing over the worn plastic, the smell of mildew and decay rising into my nose. The reel-to-reel sat on a shelf nearby. I dusted it off, heart thumping, and set the first tape to play. The hiss of static filled the room, a low, insistent whisper that made my skin crawl. And then the voice started, soft, slow, deliberate, speaking over the white noise. My name is not important. Listen carefully. They are coming, and you will see. Do not leave, do not turn away. I froze. The words cut through the static with a precision that was almost unnatural. The voice wasn't recorded as a memory of someone speaking. It felt alive, aware, deliberate, aimed at me. I sat down hard on the edge of a chair, flashlight illuminating the dusty shelves, the scattered boxes, the shadows leaning closer. The voice continued, almost as if reading my thoughts. You will arrive before the others. You will see what they cannot. Watch carefully. Remember. I swallowed hard, uneasy. The tape's words sent chills crawling up my spine. I glanced at the other tapes. There were 5 in total, all labeled similarly. Dates, names, nothing else. Yet this first tape was enough to make my pulse spike. How did this voice know me? How did it know I would come here tonight? The static hissed again, softer now, almost like breathing. I tried to rationalize. Old recordings, someone warning. Maybe paranoia embedded in a prior officer's mind. But the certainty in the voice, the deliberate pacing, it felt alive. Watching, waiting. I played the next tape. The same hiss, the same soft of a machine, but the words were different, directed specifically, almost conversational. Do not touch the boxes on the left. They are aware. They move when you aren't looking. You will feel their gaze. Do not respond. Keep moving. I froze, flashlight trembling. The boxes, I had brushed past them when entering the room. A cold shiver traveled down my spine. Slowly, almost unwillingly, I turned the light toward the stack. Shadows clung to them, stretching, leaning, bending at impossible angles. My breathing quickened. It wasn't a trick. The voice had been right. I pressed forward, hands shaking as I cued the third tape. You will see what hides in plain sight. Do not blink. They are patient. They wait for distraction, for hesitation. Every sound, every movement is known. Keep your eyes open. Remember the pattern. Remember the names. I didn't understand at first. The words were cryptic, almost nonsensical, yet threaded with something primal. A memory, perhaps, or a warning buried so deep it was almost instinctual. My heart hammered. The room felt smaller, pressing in on me. Shadows stretching across walls, ceiling, and floor like liquid. The fourth tape began. The voice was clearer, stronger, deliberate. You will turn, you will look, and it will be there. The hand, the eyes, the memory. Do not flinch. Do not speak. The forest of the station remembers. Every step you take is recorded. Every hesitation noted. You are part of it now. My chest tightened. Part of it? I swallowed, trying to keep my thoughts steady. The air in the evidence room had thickened, heavy, almost viscous. The shadows around the stacks of files and boxes seemed to twitch and lean closer. And then I noticed movement at the edge of the flashlight beam. Just a flicker, a shifting in the corner. But enough. Enough to make the blood drain from my face. I whispered, though no one could hear. Who's there? Nothing. Only the hiss of the tape and the low hum of the machine. But the sense of presence pressed heavier now, coiling around my chest, threading through my mind, whispering in rhythm with my pulse. The voice had said it. Everything is known. Every step. Every hesitation. I lifted the last tape with trembling hands. The spool rattled slightly, a dry, brittle sound. My pulse raced as I set it into the player. The hiss came first, then words that seemed to crawl out of the static, deliberate and clear. You will feel a touch, a brush, a presence behind your shoulder. Do not turn. Do not flee. You are marked. They will wait, but you will see. Listen carefully. They speak only to those who arrive. A cold draft brushed the back of my neck. I froze, flashlight trembling, breath shallow, my pulse thundering in my ears. Slowly, with deliberate fear, I turned my head. Nothing. Empty room. Boxes, shelves, shadows stretching. And yet the presence remained, pressing, patient, deliberate. I sank to the edge of the chair, hands covering my face. The recordings, they weren't merely recordings. They were alive, observant, threaded with knowledge, with awareness, with anticipation. I could feel it in the room, in the shadows, in the dust particles that floated lazily in the beam of my flashlight. Something had prepared them, left them, and now they spoke to me. The last few minutes of the tape became almost unbearable. The voice repeated names, dates, phrases I didn't recognize but somehow understood. Warnings, memories, instructions, threaded together in a rhythm that matched my own heartbeat. You will leave, but you will carry it. Do not resist. It will follow. The pattern will continue. Remember the whispers. Remember the shadow. Do not blink. They are patient. The static rose, sharp, almost painful, until the tape ended with a long hiss and silence. Absolute silence. My ears rang. My head spun. The shadows around me remained. Still, patient, aware. I stood, legs shaking, flashlight illuminating every corner. The boxes were intact. Nothing had moved. And yet I felt it. The gaze of something unseen, waiting, deliberate, patient. I had no doubt. The tapes weren't warnings. They weren't memories. They were instructions. Messages from something older, deeper, present. And it knew me. I left the evidence room slowly. Every footstep measured. Every glance over my shoulder careful. The station felt alive, walls pressing closer, ceilings lowering imperceptibly, shadows twitching at the edge of vision. The recordings had followed me. I could feel them threading into my mind, into my memory, predicting, anticipating. In the quiet hallway, I replayed the words in my head. Every warning, every phrase, every name. They weren't just directions, they were knowledge. The tapes knew what I would see, what I would feel, what I would do. They were alive, patient, deliberate, waiting for the next step, the next movement. I paused by the central console, hand trembling over the buttons. The monitors flickered, static again. Shadows shifted in corners I hadn't noticed before. And I understood fully. The recordings weren't past. They were present. They were here, now, threaded into the building, into the night, into me. I left the station eventually, stepping into the foggy night, heart hammering, every shadow on the lot magnified, every sound exaggerated, every whisper threading through the edges of perception. The tapes had marked me, threaded into my memory, into my mind. I knew that the next time the alarms went off, or the next time I returned, they would speak again, predict again, anticipate again. Even now in my office, reviewing reports, checking schedules, I can hear them, not through speakers, not through tape, but in memory, in shadow, in the edge of perception. Names, dates, warnings, whispers, predictive, deliberate, patient. The tapes were never just recordings. They were alive, observant, waiting, and I knew without doubt that the station itself was aware. I haven't touched the tapes again. I haven't needed to. Their presence lingers, threaded into the air, into the shadows, into the pulse of the station itself. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of fluorescent light, every hum of machinery reminds me that they are aware, that they know, that they wait. And the messages will continue, predicting what I cannot yet see, threading to the darkness, patient, deliberate. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. The station was quiet, but quiet in the wrong way, the kind that presses down and reminds you that the walls themselves are listening. I kept glancing at the monitors, expecting the shadows to creep back in, the hum of the electronics, the occasional flicker of fluorescent lights. All of it pressed on my nerves like a weight I couldn't shake. I should have known it wouldn't stay quiet for long. It started with the cameras again. I was reviewing footage from the overnight patrols, tried to make sense of the alarms, the locked room, the strange presence that had marked me on the screen. The hallways were empty as far as they should have been. But then I noticed it. Movement in the corner of a frame. A figure. Just a blur at first. Almost like a trick of the light. I leaned closer, trying to focus, and it became a shape. Tall, thin, just standing there, still watching. I froze. My hands gripped the console, so tight my knuckles ached. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, just lingered at the edge of the hall, almost hidden in shadow, and then it vanished. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. It had to be fatigue. That's what I told myself. Long night, no sleep, too many shadows and empty corridors. But the unease didn't leave. My pulse thrummed in my ears, echoing the rhythm of the building, the pulse that had never really stopped. Curiosity edged out caution. I got up and walked the hallways, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Nothing, just the familiar hum of the station, the creak of old floorboards, the smell of stale air and machinery. Yet I could feel it. Eyes, or something that felt like eyes, watching from corners I couldn't illuminate. I returned to the monitors. That's when I noticed something else. In another hallway, a shadow moving against the grain of the footage, a figure slipping between frames. Every time I tried to focus, it vanished. The closer the camera got, the more the figure dissolved, as if aware of observation. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swore it mimicked my movements, tilted its head when I did, shifted weight when I did. I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" My voice sounded strange in the empty station. Weak, hollow. The monitors didn't answer, of course. Only flicker, static, and the occasional echo of a footstep that didn't exist. I walked down the hall that the camera showed the shadow had been in. Each step was deliberate, careful, as though the floor itself were a live wire ready to react. The hallway was empty. Only the fluorescent lights overhead flickered in uneven pulses. I stopped, held my breath, waited, and then it was gone. No trace. Nothing but the walls and the low hum of the station. I forced myself to return to the console. My eyes scanned the footage, but now figures appeared on every monitor, not in every frame, but long enough to catch glimpses, tall, thin shapes standing in corners, slipping between cameras, sometimes stationary, sometimes moving just out of the edge of perception, always aware, always patient, always gone when approached. A soft whisper drifted through the room. I turned sharply, flashlight sweeping the office. Empty. The whisper came again, faint, a syllable stretched and broken. My name, I thought, or maybe just a fragment, an echo. You. It lingered, barely audible, threading through the static of the monitors. My stomach sank. I shut off the monitors, thinking maybe the flicker of light was making me imagine it, but the shadows didn't leave. They lingered, pressing against the corners of the office, pulling just beyond the beam of my flashlight. I could feel the weight of them, a presence pressing against my skin, my chest, my mind. I forced myself to move again, down the main hallway this time. The station felt different in motion. The walls, the corners, the lights, they seemed to breathe, to shift. I could feel it pressing in. I could almost hear movement behind me, synchronized with my own. Footsteps, mine or copies of mine, echoing behind me, out of sync just enough to be wrong. The monitors flickered back on by themselves. Shadows returned. Figures standing just outside the camera's clear vision, their forms stretching, twisting in ways human bodies should not. And each time I moved closer, they vanished. Every approach brought nothing but empty hallway. But the sense of being watched deepened, pressing into my mind. I stopped at the stairwell, leading to the upper floors. The cameras showed a figure at the top. Waiting, I could see the angle shift, almost as if it anticipated my gaze. I held my flashlight up. Nothing. The stairwell was empty, but the sensation remained. Eyes on my back, awareness pressing, threading into thought. I called dispatch, voice cracking. Anyone else in the building? This is, something's wrong. No response. Static, then silence. The station itself seemed to swallow the sound, leaving me with only the low hum and the flickering monitors. I tried to rationalize. Exhaustion, shadows, stress. That's all it could be. But deep down, I knew better. I could feel the building's memory. The long trail of alarms, the locked room, the shadows that vanished when approached. The station was alive in some way. Aware, watching, and patient. I returned to main hall, scanning each doorway. The shadows appeared and disappeared in the corners of my vision. Impossible to approach, impossible to confirm. Each time I tried, the monitor flickered and the hallway was empty, yet the presence persisted, pressing in, threading itself with floor, walls, and ceilings. Then came the whispers again, clearer now, words this time fractured, almost coherent. Do not follow, leave, not safe. They echoed and bounced, shifting locations impossible to locate. I pressed my hands to my ears, desperate to block them out. My mind felt stretched, pulled toward the edges of reason. A shadow shifted in the corner of my eye, slowly, deliberately, taller than it should have been, angles wrong, movements just off from human. I focused and it dissolved. Nothing there, only the low hum, the flicker of fluorescent lights, the weight of unseen eyes. I realized then that the station wasn't just haunted. It was aware, deliberate, observing. Every flicker, every shift, every static line on the monitor was not random. It was a message, a warning, a thread pulling me into the building's memory. And I was a part of it now. Cataloged, noted, watched. I moved through the hallway again, flashlight trembling, each corner pressed back. Every shadow stretched unnaturally, as though the walls themselves bent to contain me. I could hear faint footfalls echoing behind me, copies of my own, but they didn't match my steps exactly. Always one beat off, always wrong. I reached the main office again, monitors flickering wildly. Figures on the screens appeared more frequently, sometimes clear, sometimes dissolving into static, each vanishing as I approached. The whispers intensified, threading through thought, memory, fear. See, not safe, leave. I fell back in my chair, heart hammering. My hands shook as I touched the console. Every system flickered under my fingers, lights, alarms, cameras, all alive, all aware, all threading into my mind. The station itself had become an entity, patient, deliberate, and relentless. And then the monitors went black. Silence. The lights stabilized. The low hum remained, pressing into my chest, threading through my bones. I was alone again, or at least alone in appearance. The shadows had vanished, but I knew they were still there, waiting, patient, aware. I left the office, stepped into the hallway. The station was quiet, normal almost, yet every instinct screamed that the presence had not left. It had marked me, observed me, and it would wait. Always, patient, silent, watching. I walked through the empty corridors, flashlight cutting weakly through the shadows. Every step echoed unnaturally, as if the walls remembered and mirrored me. The sense of being followed never left, and I knew that at any moment the shadows could return, appear in the corner of a monitor, slip through a hallway, vanish the instant I turned. Even now, writing this down, I can feel it. The awareness of station, patient, deliberate, waiting. Every shadow, every flicker, every whisper is a reminder that I am being watched. And it waits for me to slip, to look too long, to turn a corner where nothing exists but memory and expectation. The shadows in the hallway are not gone. They never will be. They wait, patient, watching. The highway was empty when the fog rolled in. One moment. The road stretched ahead in its familiar pattern, headlights cutting through the night. The next, it was gone. A white wall swallowed everything, soft and thick, crawling across the asphalt like it had a mind of its own. I slowed the cruiser, hand tight on the wheel, trying to make sense of it. Visibility dropped almost instantly. A few yards ahead, the lines on the road disappeared, swallowed by the haze. My breath hitched. I glanced at the rear view mirror. Nothing, not even my own taillights, just fog, endless fog. It wasn't normal. I've driven this stretch 100 times, through rain, sleet, even snow. But this was different. This wasn't weather. This was alive. I flicked on the overhead lights in the cruiser. The beams barely penetrated the mist. Street signs faded into the white. Lampposts dissolved before my eyes. Every instinct screamed to pull over, to stop, to wait it out. But something pressed at the edges of my mind. A pull I couldn't name. I had to move forward. Or maybe I wanted to. The radio crackled. A single, distorted voice. Just a fragment. Don't look. I spun the dial, hoping for a clearer signal. Anything to tell me this was just static. But the crackle remained, whispers under it, twisting unplaceable. I caught my own breath on it, though I couldn't explain how. My pulse accelerated. Then headlights appeared. Far ahead, dim, struggling through the fog. Relief. Finally, another vehicle. I eased toward it, thinking maybe someone else had been caught in this. But as I approached, the headlights vanished. Not faded, not driven off. Gone, as though they had never been there. My stomach tightened. I blinked and the fog shifted. Shapes appeared in the mist, almost human. Figures standing at the roadside, motionless, silent, watching. I squinted, leaning forward, trying to make out details. They were too far, too distorted by the fog, yet their presence pressed against me, against the car, against my chest. I reached for the radio again. Static, the voice was back, clearer, insistent. Turn back, leave. My hand shook. Logic told me I should turn around, retrace my route, but the road behind was gone. My headlights reflected only fog. No markings, no end, no beginning. I was trapped inside it. The fog thickened. Even the cruiser's headlights seemed weak now, dying in the white haze. Every shadow, every wisp of vapor moved in ways it shouldn't, twisting around corners, curling toward the car, as if aware of my presence. I blinked rapidly, heart hammering. My mind wanted to call for backup, wanted to pull out and run. But there was no sense of direction, no safe place. only the endless stretch of white. A sound cut through the hum of the engine. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, pacing along the shoulder of the road. I turned, flashlight sweeping the fog through the cracked windshield. Nothing, only the sound of steps. Sometimes close, sometimes far, always keeping pace with my own. My pulse raced, the sense of being followed pressed against the windows, as though something unseen mirrored my every move. I tried to tell myself it was exhaustion. A long shift, late night, miles of empty highway. My imagination playing tricks. But the footsteps continued, impossibly synchronized with the pulse of the fog itself. I could feel it now in the air in my lungs and my chest. Something alive, moving just beyond sight, watching, waiting. The fog shifted again. The shapes at the roadside multiplied. Faces began to emerge from the mist. Pale, vague, impossibly still, stare with empty eyes that seemed to pierce the headlights. My stomach lurched. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white. They didn't move when I looked directly, but in the corners of my eyes, they twisted, slouched, shifted, always just outside clarity. Then came the sound of breathing. Not mine. Deep, cold, deliberate, around the car, under the fog. Threading through the air like it belonged to the mist itself. I couldn't locate it, couldn't pinpoint it, but it pressed against my mind, filling every silence, every space. I swallowed hard, trying to speak. Hello. My own voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the fog. The highway markers vanished. The lines on the road disappeared entirely. All I could see was white, moving and curling around the cruiser. My headlights caught shapes that vanished the instant I tried to focus on them. Figures at the roadside. Shadows behind the fog. Something that moved with intent, but no form I could define. Panic edged in. My hands shook. My foot trembled on the brake and accelerator, unsure which to press. The fog felt alive now, pressing against the tires, swirling around the car, folding into itself like it was aware of my presence. And then the shapes came closer. No longer at the roadside. They were inside the fog now, moving toward me, approaching, patient, deliberate. I forced myself to breathe, slow and deep, try to remember who I was, what I knew, logic, procedure, safety, keep moving, keep alert. My hands trembled on the wheel, and the radio crackled again, just static at first, then a voice, urgent, low, familiar yet alien. You're seen, watch, do not leave. I slammed on the brakes. The fog surged forward like a wave, pressing against the front of the cruiser. Shapes ride just beyond the glass, twisting, bending, impossible forms. I slammed the horn, desperate for sound to pierce it. The fog seemed to pulse with the horn, rolling and curling around it, swallowing every echo. Then headlights appeared again, dim, distant, and this time they stayed, just barely visible in the haze. Relief surged. Someone, anyone, on this cursed stretch of road. I pushed the accelerator forward, trying to reach them, but as I moved, they vanished. Not faded, gone entirely. No trace, just the fog. Endless, patient, alive. I tried to call dispatch again. No signal. The radio static swallowed my voice. Then the faintest whisper under the hum of the cruiser's engine. Do not see, do not know. My heart raced. My stomach knotted. My eyes darted, searching for anything solid, anything safe. But there was nothing. Only white, only fog, only shapes that should not exist. Time began to warp. Minutes stretched impossibly. The fog didn't shift. The road didn't move. The shapes lingered, twisting just beyond clarity. Threading through the mist, always aware. I blinked rapidly, trying to shake off the vertigo. But it pressed in, folding reality in around me. A shadow appeared in the middle of the road. Solid, pale, tall. It didn't move at first. Just stood, perfectly still, stretching impossibly high. I swerved slightly, heart hammering. Headlights caught it, but when I blinked, it was gone. Not disappeared, dissolved into the fog. My pulse thundered in my ears. I could feel it. Presence, awareness, something deliberate and patient. The fog whispered around the cruiser. Not words at first, just the pressure of sound, vibrating to the tires, the doors, the air. Then words, faint and broken. Turn back, leave, do not follow. I pressed my hands to the wheel, knuckles white, desperate to keep control. I couldn't. The fog had its own rules, its own intent. I was inside it, trapped in a living, breathing wall of white. I remembered the stories. Old calls about this stretch. Missing travelers. Patrols gone without trace. Warnings and dispatch logs that made no sense at the time. And now, alone inside it, I understood. The fog didn't just disorient. It consumed. It observed. It waited. And now it had me. I pushed forward. Each yard an eternity. Shapes twisted along the edges of my headlights. Shadows stretching impossibly. Bending in ways that should not be. Footsteps echoed just beyond the tires, matching my speed, mirroring my movements. I dared not glance away. I dared not blink too long. And then the radio burst to life. My own voice distorted, fractured, threading through static. Do not leave, do not. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a recording. Not exactly. It was me, or the fog's memory of me. Every fear, every hesitation, every thought I'd had tonight. It threaded back at me through the radio waves. I slammed the brakes hard. Fog rolling around the car like water, pressure pressing, alive, aware. Headlights caught shapes again, impossible angles, twisting limbs, faces that shouldn't exist. I blinked. They vanished. Gone but present, pressing in memory and perception. I couldn't stop, couldn't slow. The fog had claimed the road, claimed the night, claimed me. Every instinct screamed to escape. Every rational thought told me there was nowhere to go. The highway stretched endlessly, white and empty, and I was alone inside it. Even now, hours later, I can feel it. The memory of the fog, thick and deliberate, alive and patient. Shapes that move and vanish. Whispers that echo in thought. The awareness of eyes unseen pressing against your mind. I can still feel it watching. Always waiting. Always patient. Endless. Unbroken. And I know that if I return to that stretch of highway, it will be waiting, watching, patient. The fog hadn't lifted. Not really. I thought maybe the first stretch was an anomaly, a trick of the night. But as I drove on, the white haze remained thick and unrelenting, pressing against the cruiser like it had a weight of its own. The highway stretched ahead, or it should have. But even familiar markers seemed wrong. Then I saw the first sign, a green highway marker, glowing faintly through the fog. I squinted, headlights cutting through the white, and my stomach dropped. The numbers weren't ones I recognized. The town it pointed to, Elmsworth, didn't exist on any map I had ever seen. I slowed, hoping it was a misread, maybe a reflection, anything, but the letters were clear, crisp, intentional. I passed it, tried to shake the feeling, trying to rationalize. Fog, exhaustion, my mind playing tricks after the first stretch of white that swallowed the road. But the next sign confirmed it. Another town, another number, another impossible direction, and then another, each one pointing farther off the highway, farther off reality. I pressed the accelerator, but the fog thickened, curling around the cruiser, wrapping the road in white. I tried the radio. Static, and then a faint warped signal. Do not follow, do not turn. My pulse quickened. The voice was distant, fragmented, as though stretched across the night. I swallowed hard, eyes scanning the fog. Shapes flickered at the edges of my headlights. Trees? Maybe. Figures? Possibly. Impossible to know. Another sign appeared, this one closer, looming out of the white like it had materialized. It pointed to a place called Grayford, a town that had been abandoned decades ago. I knew the history. I'd driven this route enough to remember, but the sign was perfect. Crisp new paint, no rust, nowhere. And below it, another arrow pointing in the opposite direction, to a place I'd never heard of, Harrow's End. The road itself seemed to twist now. Subtle curves that weren't there before, subtle hills that I didn't recognize. I could feel the weight of the fog pressing, bending perception, threading into thought. Each mile marker I passed was wrong, shifted, altered, pointing to roads that didn't exist. My stomach churned. I slowed to a crawl. Headlights cut only a few yards ahead. and the fog seemed to crawl faster than the cruiser, pressing from all sides. I kept my hands on the wheel, knuckles white, trying to make sense of it, but logic failed. Every familiar stretch of highway had become unfamiliar. Every landmark warped, altered, unreadable. Another sign appeared, this time directly overhead, illuminated by the weak beam of my headlights. Welcome to Hollow Pass. I froze. Hollow Pass wasn't on any map, wasn't in any GPS database, wasn't anywhere I'd ever seen. And yet it was right there, letters sharp, clear, and intentional. My pulse hammered in my ears. I pressed on, tried to rationalize. It had to be exhaustion, fatigue, my mind twisting the familiar into something strange. But then the signs began to change as I drove. Not slowly, not naturally. I would glance away for a second, and when I looked back, the signs pointed somewhere entirely different. Elmsworth became Hollow Pass. Hollow Pass became Grayford. Grayford became names that didn't exist in any database, any map, any memory. And each time, the fog thickened. Shapes flitted just beyond my headlights, pale, tall, impossible, moving with awareness, avoiding direct observation. I tried to turn around. The road behind was gone. Or maybe it never had been there. Only fog. Endless, patient, deliberate. My hand shook on the wheel. The radio static hummed again, then a whisper. "You are seen, do not." The words dissolved into static, threading into my thoughts, pressing on my mind. The highway began to fold in on itself. The signs now appeared almost constantly, overhead on the roadside, even painted faintly on the fog itself, each one pointing in a direction that didn't make sense, naming towns that didn't exist, numbers that defied reason. I could feel the presence pressing now, not just from fog, not just from the altered road, but from the air itself, alive, aware, patient. I slowed again, headlights barely cutting through the white, and the shapes became clearer. Figures at the roadside, but too pale, too still. Shadows bending unnaturally around them. They weren't human, not entirely. Their awareness pressed in, threading into mine, watching, waiting. I tried to shake it off, tried to focus on the road, but the signs kept changing. I passed a turn that should have led to an exit. The sign overhead named it differently now, and at the next mile marker, another name appeared, pointing to a place called Black Hollow, a town whose history I didn't know. My pulse raced. Every instinct screamed to stop, to escape, but there was no escape. Only fog, only signs, only the road that no longer existed as it should. Then I saw a movement, a figure at the edge of the fog, tall, thin, unnaturally still, head tilted, watching. I froze, tried to focus, but as always, the moment I tried to look directly, it vanished into the white, and then another appeared, and another, at the roadside in the fog, always just beyond clarity, watching, waiting. The radio crackled again. This time, the whisper was clearer, threaded with my own voice. "Do not, you cannot leave." My stomach nodded. I recognized my own thoughts in it, my own fear. The fog had threaded into my mind. The signs weren't just misdirection. They were a trap, a language, a map I wasn't meant to read. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, trying to stay calm. The road seemed endless. Signs continued to appear, morphing as I drove past. Town names changing, distances impossible, numbers counting down, up, forward, backward. I couldn't make sense of it. My pulse thumped in my ears. The cruiser's engine sounded distant, as though I was observing from somewhere else. Another shape appeared in the fog, directly in the path of the car. I slammed on the brakes. The headlights barely cut through it. A figure, pale, tall, elongated, head cocked to one side. Eyes that weren't eyes, hollow but aware. I held my breath. It dissolved as I blinked. Vanished. Gone, but present in the corners of my vision. Always aware, always patient. Signs overhead flickered. Hollow Pass. Then Elmsworth. Then Black Hollow. Names scrolling across one another. Letters twisting and stretching impossibly. My mind reeled. I knew the towns weren't real. I knew the numbers didn't exist. And yet, they were real in this moment. Real in the fog. Real in the pressure that pressed against my chest. threading into my mind. I tried the radio again. Static, and then the whisper, insistent, deliberate. Your scene cannot leave, follow the path. My hand shook. My heart hammered. My vision blurred. I could feel the shapes closing in, flitting along the roadside, twisting in the fog, bending light in impossible ways. Always aware, always patient, always watching. I tried to accelerate, tried to leave the stretch behind me, but the road twisted, stretched, curved unnaturally. The signs changed again, pointing me forward, 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 and the shapes followed, sliding just beyond sight, along the roadside, through the mist, bending in impossible angles. I realized then that the fog wasn't just fog. The road wasn't just asphalt. The signs weren't just markers. They were deliberate, aware, alive, and I was trapped inside their design. I could feel the memory of every traveler, every patrol, every person who had ever driven this stretch threading into the white. A pattern I wasn't meant to see, a language I couldn't understand. Minutes or hours. I don't know how long passed. I drove. The fog thickened. The signs multiplied, shifting, renaming, pointing to impossible locations. The figures moved along the roadside, never blinking, never speaking, always present, always patient. And the whisper of my own voice, or something like it, threaded to the static of the radio, weaving into thought. Do not leave. Do not turn. You are part of it now. I gripped the wheel until my fingers ached. My pulse thundered. My vision narrowed. The fog pressed against the car, the road, the air itself, alive, aware, deliberate. Every sign, every figure, every whisper threaded into a pattern, and I was in the center, observed, not trapped physically, but trapped in perception, in awareness, in the fold of something older, patient, deliberate. Eventually, the fog thinned slightly, revealing a faint light ahead. Relief surged. Maybe an exit. Maybe the edge of this nightmare. But the signs didn't stop. They continued to shift and rename as I approached. The figures lingered just at the edges, patient, watching, waiting. Even now, hours later, I can feel it pressing. The memory of the fog, the impossible signs, the figures flitting just beyond sight, the awareness that I am seen, cataloged, observed. The fog had thinned by the time I reached the next stretch of highway, but the night still felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on me. The road stretched straight and empty, broken only by the occasional curve, and the only sound was the hum of the cruiser's engine and the rhythmic thrum of my pulse. I kept glancing at the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see shapes flitting in the shadows, but there was nothing, just the black expanse behind me. Then I saw her, or him. I couldn't tell at first. A figure at the roadside, thumb out, leaning slightly against a weathered signpost. The fog made it hard to see details, but I slowed instinctively, heart thudding in my chest. Something about the posture, the way the figure waited, still and calm, triggered every cautionary instinct I had. But the road was empty, no towns, no exits for miles, and there was something vulnerable about the figure that drew me forward. I rolled down the window, halfway. You need a ride? My voice sounded louder than I expected in the silence. The figure lifted a hand slowly, almost deliberately. A nod. I pulled over to the shoulder. The gravel crunched under the tires. The figure stepped forward, moving with a strange, almost gliding motion. Up close, I could see the face. Pale, sharp features, eyes too dark, too deep to read. There was a calmness there that didn't fit with the empty highway. The fog, the night, almost deliberate. Where are you headed? I asked, forcing a casual tone. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tight. Anywhere, the figure said. The voice was soft, but it carried in the stillness. Calm, even comforting in a way that made my skin crawl. I nodded, almost automatically, and unlocked the passenger door. The figure slid in. Smelled faintly of cold air, damp earth, something metallic. I swallowed hard, glancing at the road ahead. We drove in silence at first. The fog was back, thicker this time, curling along the asphalt, drifting into the cruiser like smoke. I could feel the presence in the seat beside me, but it wasn't threatening. Not exactly. Just impossible. After a few minutes, I tried to make conversation. Long walk tonight. The figure tilted its head slightly, looking out the window. I've been waiting, it said. Simple, oddly precise. And the words didn't land the way normal words should. There was a weight to them, as if they were meant to resonate beyond the sound. I nodded, throat dry. Yeah, this stretch gets empty. Most folks don't stop out here. No one notices, it said. The words were quiet, but precise, almost like a warning. I swallowed again. My pulse was quickening. Something about the tone, the weight behind it, pressed into my chest. We drove on. Miles stretched ahead, the fog curling in impossible waves, twisting around the car. I kept glancing at the figure beside me. It was still, almost too still, hands resting lightly on the knees, posture perfect, eyes occasionally flicking to me, though not too directly. You're far from anywhere, I said, trying to fill the silence. My voice sounded small. Far isn't far, it said. Its lips barely moved, but the words sank deep. It only feels that way. A shiver ran down my spine. The road was unfamiliar now. Subtle hills and curves that shouldn't exist. I glanced at the road signs, half expecting the impossible markers from before, but they were gone. Empty asphalt, stretching under headlights that seemed weaker than before. I tried to focus on driving, but the presence in the passenger seat was impossible to ignore. It leaned slightly toward me, not threateningly, but deliberately, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The silence between us stretched, but it was not empty. It pressed against my mind, threading into thought, pulling at memory, pulling at instinct. Do you walk here often? I asked, though the words felt absurd even as I spoke them. Sometimes, it said, a smile, small, almost imperceptible, tugged at the corners of its mouth. But it wasn't friendly. Not exactly. It was knowing, calculated, like it had seen everything and nothing mattered. The fog thickened suddenly, curling into the car, pressing against the windows, curling under the doors. Headlights barely penetrated it. I squinted. Shapes flickered at the edges of the beams. Shadows that should not have moved, twisting with awareness, bending around the mist. Do you see them? I asked, voice low, almost hesitant. It's better if you don't, it said. They notice when you do. I swallowed hard. The figure tilted its head, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow. The fog outside became static, curling around the car like a living thing. And then, abruptly, the figure was gone. Gone. I froze, foot hovering over brake. The seat beside me was empty. The door hadn't opened. I hadn't stopped. No sound, no movement, nothing. My pulse thundered. I glanced around frantically. The figure had been here, had spoken, had breathed, had occupied space, and now it had vanished. I slammed the brakes lightly, heart hammering. The fog seemed thicker now, pressing from all sides, curling around the cruiser like it was aware of the absence, aware of my panic. I leaned over, checking the seat, under it, even the floor. Nothing. No trace. Not a bag, not a coat, not a smell. Nothing. I slammed my hands on the wheel, breathing hard. The road stretched on endlessly, empty and silent. Headlights caught glimpses of the roadside, pale outlines of trees, markers that had no meaning. I could feel it, the presence of the figure, still pressing, still aware, threading into thought, a shadow in memory even when the body was gone. I tried to rationalize. Exhaustion, hallucination, the fog, the empty highway, my mind playing tricks. But deep down I knew better. I had seen it, spoken with it, and now it had left deliberately. Not vanished randomly, but with intent. And the intent was something I couldn't name. Something patient and deliberate. The fog seemed to move now with a rhythm. Not with the wind, not with the movement of the car, but with intent. Curling into headlights, sliding along the asphalt, brushing the windows as though it remembered the figure, remembered its absence, remembered me. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel until my knuckles ached. I tried the radio. Static, nothing else. Then a whisper, faint, distant, threading through the static. Do not follow. My pulse thundered. The words were not the figure's voice. Exactly. Not mine either. Somewhere in between. But I recognized the intent. A warning. A pressure. And I knew, somehow, that it had to do with the hitchhiker. I pressed the accelerator, desperate to leave the stretch behind me. The fog twisted around the cruiser, curling, bending, alive. And then, in the rear-view mirror, I saw something, a shadow, almost human, gliding along the roadside. Gone the moment I tried to look directly, but always there in the corner of my vision, patient, waiting, a presence that followed. Even though the body of the figure had vanished, my thoughts raced. The hitchhiker hadn't just disappeared. It had chosen. It had left or never intended to stay. And the fog, the road, the night itself were extensions of that choice, pressing in, threading into perception, twisting reality. Minutes, or maybe hours, I don't know, passed. The fog thinned slightly ahead. Headlights caught the familiar markers of the highway. Relief surged, but the memory of the figure, of its voice, of its presence, lingered. Heavy, persistent, threaded into thought like a shadow that would not leave. Even now, long after the stretch of highway, I can feel it, the weight of the presence, the knowledge that it watches deliberate and patient, that it chooses when to appear and when to vanish, and when it disappears, it does not leave nothing. It leaves awareness, threads and memory, shadows and thought. I know that if I return to that highway, if I pass that fog again, I will see it. Patient, deliberate, waiting, not threatening, not kind, just aware. And I will know that for it, I am not alone. The hitchhiker wasn't real in any way that fits logic, but it was real. I know that now. And the fog, the shapes, the road, they all remember. They wait, and I can still feel the weight of that presence, even in the safety of my own home, hours away. Always watching, always patient, always deliberate. The fog had become a constant companion now, curling into the cruiser like a living thing, pressing against the windows and headlights, wrapping the world in white. The road stretched ahead, or at least I thought it did. But the more I drove, the more I realized it was not stretching forward at all. I had the strangest, sinking feeling that I was moving, yet nowhere. I glanced at the dashboard. Mile markers blurred past. Numbers that shouldn't have repeated, suddenly repeating again. I shook my head. I was tired. I must have been driving for hours. But the road ahead, it looked the same as the road behind. Familiar curves, the same lone trees, the same cracked signs. Everything echoed itself in an impossible pattern. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my pulse. It's just fatigue, I muttered aloud, but my voice sounded weak in the stillness of the night. Just tired, driving too long. Fog, nothing more. I turned the wheel slightly, hoping to break the monotony. The cruiser veered, tires crunching over gravel. But the next stretch of road, when it appeared, was identical. Every bend, every shadow, every faint roadside marker. Exactly the same. My stomach sank. The fog shifted as I drove, curling around the headlights, twisting shadows into shapes that seemed aware of my movement. I tried to focus on the road ahead, tried to find something, anything to anchor myself, but every landmark I passed had been passed before. The same dead tree, the same pothole, the same broken fence post leaning at the same angle. Then I saw it, a sign, a mile marker, green, reflecting faintly in the headlights. I leaned forward, squinting. The number was the same as the last one I had passed. Not close, not just similar, identical. My stomach turned. I knew I had driven past it already. I slowed, heart hammering. I looked to the side, scanning the fog for any other markers, anything to tell me where I was. But the world beyond the headlights was a white void. And then I realized I had passed this exact stretch of highway before. Hours ago, minutes ago, time had folded, or maybe I had. A laugh bubbled up, hollow and shaky. I slapped a hand over my mouth. This wasn't right. I knew the roads. I knew this county. But I had never seen this stretch before, or maybe I had too many times. The thought pressed against my mind, a slow, twisting panic curling in my chest. I tried to turn around. The wheel fought me slightly, as though the road itself resisted. I swerved, trying to take the next exit. but there was no exit, only the same stretch of asphalt, the same fog curling along the shoulders, the same shadows dancing at the edges of my headlights. I pressed my hands to the wheel, knuckles white, and tried to breathe. I had to rationalize. It was exhaustion, fatigue, stress, driving too long at night. But the repeating markers, the impossible turns, the way the road folded back on itself, it wasn't exhaustion. I knew it. Something deliberate pressed in. Watching. Waiting. I passed another sign. A warning maybe. Though it didn't feel like one. The letters twisted faintly, as if reflected in water, and my eyes burned trying to focus. Names I didn't know appeared. Harrow's End. Grayford. Hollow Pass. And then, impossibly, the same sign appeared again a few moments later, pointing in the same direction. I pressed the accelerator, hoping to break the cycle. The cruiser roared, tires spinning slightly on the damp asphalt, and the fog thickened in response. The road didn't change. I didn't change. It all repeated, endlessly, a loop that seemed to mock me, a mirror of the impossible highway I had driven hours ago, or minutes ago. I couldn't remember anymore. The shapes returned. At first, vague, just flickers at the edges of vision, then more distinct. Tall, pale, faceless figures moving along the roadside, not running, not walking, gliding. They didn't look at me directly, but I could feel their awareness, the pressure of observation. The fog seemed to cling to them, shaping them, defining them in impossible ways. I forced myself to look away, to focus on the road, but the loop didn't break. Every curve, every bend, every shadow repeated itself perfectly. I knew the highway shouldn't behave this way. I knew the exit should appear, the sign should change, the markers should increment, but none of it did. The loop held me, patient, deliberate, a world folded over itself, trapping me in its design. I pressed the radio button, hoping for a voice, a signal, anything. Static, white noise, and then, almost beneath it, a whisper threaded in. Not human, not mechanical. It was familiar, though I couldn't place it at first. And then I realized the tone, the cadence, it was my own voice. Speaking words I hadn't thought aloud. You cannot leave, you cannot leave. I slapped the radio off, hand shaking, trying to focus on the road. But the whisper didn't stop, threading through my mind, threading through the fog, threading through the repetition. Every curve, every marker, every shadow became a syllable in a language I didn't know but understood instinctively. Warning, observation, patience. The headlights caught something out of place. A road sign, faded, old, almost rotted, leaning at an impossible angle. I recognized it, not from memory, from hours ago, from minutes ago. I had passed the sign before. I would pass it again. I could feel it. The repetition pressed in, deep into thought, threading into perception. Time here was not linear. Space here was not linear. The loop itself was alive. I slowed, hands gripping the wheel until they ached. The cruiser seemed to resist a change, the world outside pressing in, fog curling into the cabin, brushing my skin. And then the shapes appeared closer, moving along the roadside, aware, patient, deliberate, figures I had glimpsed before, but now defined by presence, not form, watching me navigate the loop, watching me try to escape. I tried call out. My voice sounded thin, fragile, swallowed by the fog. Who's there? I whispered, but no response came. Not a word. Only the repetition. Only the loop. Only the impossible stretch of highway that circled endlessly, mocking the logic I clung to. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. I don't know. The loop consumed everything. Landmarks, memories, reason. Every mile marker repeated. Every bend repeated. Every shadow repeated. I felt my mind stretching, threading into the loop, feeling it, understanding it in fragments. Pieces I didn't want to understand. It wasn't just the road. It was the awareness in fog, in the shadows, in the repetition. Waiting, observing, patient. I slammed my hands on the wheel in frustration. Enough! I shouted into the fog. My voice echoed unnaturally, swallowed immediately, bouncing back distorted, alien. Nothing changed. The loop persisted. Time, distance, and motion were illusions. Every attempt to alter direction folded back into the same pattern. Every exit vanished. Every approach returned me to the same stretch of road. I tried to close my eyes for a moment, breathe, think. The world outside shifted in my eyelids. The loop threaded into memory, threaded into thought, threading into fear. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't understand it. And the whispering voice, my voice, pressing into thought. You are seen, you are not leaving. When I opened my eyes, the fog had thinned slightly, revealing the faint outlines of the same road I had been traveling. The same tree, the same pothole, the same cracked fence. And on the roadside, figures lingered, pale, elongated, aware. Not threatening, not friendly. Just patient, deliberate, waiting for me to recognize them. I pressed the accelerator. The world stretched ahead, and yet I knew, deep down, I would pass the same markers again. The same shadows would flit along the roadside. The same fog would curl into the cruiser, pressing into awareness, threading into thought. The loop was infinite, unbroken, and I was at its center. Even now, hours later, I can feel it. The repetition, the awareness, the loop threading into thought, threading into memory, threading into the fog that waits for me, patient and deliberate on that stretch of impossible highway. And I know if I ever return, I will drive it again. The road will bend. The signs will change. The shapes will glide along the roadside, and I will recognize them, even as they twist beyond comprehension. The loop is alive. The loop is patient. And the loop remembers. It was one of those nights where everything feels heavier, like the world itself has settled into a slow, suffocating rhythm. The station was quiet, almost too quiet. Only the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the faint buzzing of the old coffee machine filled the air. I sat at my desk, paperwork stacked in neat but meaningless piles. A standard graveyard shift. Nothing unusual, or so I thought. The radio crackled suddenly. A harsh burst of static. My hand moved automatically to the receiver. Unit 5-9, I said, voice steady, professional. Go ahead. Nothing. Just static. A low, rolling buzz that filled the room, vibrating through the walls, through my bones. I muttered, probably just interference, and reached to adjust the dial. But then I heard it. Sheriff. My pulse jumped. I froze. The voice was faint, almost swallowed by the static, but unmistakable. My name. Clear. Familiar. I tried to focus, leaning closer to the radio. Hello? I whispered, voice tight. Who's there? The static shifted, a low murmur rising and falling, almost like a voice trying to form words. Sheriff, it repeated, dragging my name across the crackle, slow, deliberate, almost as if it knew I would hear it. I leaned back, unease creeping in, curling in my stomach. It had to be someone messing with the radio. A prank. That's all it could be. There were no calls in the log matching the time. No reports, no emergencies. And yet, the voice persisted. My name, carried through the static, threaded with a familiarity that made the hair on my arms stand on end. I tried speaking again. This is the station. Identify yourself. My voice sounded hollow in the empty office. The static answered, shifting slightly, rising in tone as if amused by my caution. And then, don't look. I jerked back, hand on the desk. The words, fragile as they were, carried weight. Not just noise, not just interference. They felt meant for me. Deliberate. My heart started hammering. My mind tried to rationalize electrical interference. Someone on the other end played with the frequency, but my instincts refused to accept it. There was something in that voice, something aware. I reached for the radio again, trembling slightly. Who is this? Who's there? And then another word. Home. It wasn't a sentence, just a fragment, but it made my skin crawl. Home. My home. My thoughts darted to the empty streets outside the station. The quiet town sleeping under the weight of night. I swallowed hard. This isn't funny, I said, trying to keep my tone steady, though my voice cracked. The static hummed, shifting like a living thing. I could almost feel it vibrating through the office, through the floor, threading into thought. Then the voice again. Don't sleep? I froze, gripping the edge of the desk. My own words echoed in my mind. Don't sleep? A laugh rose in my chest, nervous and shaky. Someone was playing a trick, but the timing, the weight behind the words, the way the static bent around them, it wasn't ordinary. My pulse raced. Something was wrong. I turned slightly, scanning the empty office. Shadows stretched along the walls, warped by the flickering fluorescent light. Everything seemed the same, yet different, heavier, thicker, like the air itself was pressing in, waiting. The radio crackled again, more sharply this time, almost angrily, and then my name, drawn out, deliberate, layered in the static. Sheriff, the syllables stretched, and for a moment, it wasn't sound, it was presence. I could feel it in my chest, vibrating, pressing against thought. It knew me, it had known me. I leaned back, hands shaking, trying to focus on the mundane. Electrical interference, a prank, my imagination. I told myself these things, but the deep, gnawing sense of wrongness persisted. The static shifted again, and I realized it wasn't just my name this time. It knew secrets, small things I had whispered in the dark hours at home, thoughts I had tried to bury, fragments of conversations with my wife, moments I thought forgotten, and they were threaded into the voice, woven into the static, faint but unmistakable. I staggered back slightly. My mind raced. How could this be possible? Radios don't know thoughts. Radios don't reach into memory. But whatever this was, it wasn't a radio. The device was merely the channel. The presence, the awareness, the voice. It was something else entirely, using the radio as its conduit. I reached to turn it off, to silence it, but my hand froze halfway. The static pulsed, almost in time with my heartbeat. A whisper threaded through, low and deliberate. Look outside. I spun toward the window, heart hammering. Though my rational mind screamed it was just fog, just night, just a reflection of the office lights. But the street outside, it wasn't just quiet. It was wrong. The fog had rolled in earlier, but now it seemed thicker, curling unnaturally, wrapping around lampposts, hugging the asphalt like it had weight. Shadows moved inside the fog, not quite figures, not quite reflections, shapes that didn't belong, shapes that felt aware. I turned back to the radio. The words were forming faster now, the voice weaving urgency into static. Don't sleep, don't sleep. My chest tightened, my hands shook. The shadows outside pressed closer, impossible angles forming in the fog. And the voice, my name again, stretched and twisted, threaded through static and thought, drew me in, pressed against the part of my mind I kept shielded even from myself. I sat down, hands covering my face. Rationality fought back. This was a station, empty. This was the middle of the night. This was fatigue, stress, static interference. But deep in the pit of my stomach, the dread settled. Something was here, something aware, something patient, waiting, watching. The static flared suddenly, loud, harsh, almost painful. I jumped, clutching the receiver. The voice was clear now, unmistakable. Sheriff, don't. And then nothing. Silence. The static returned to its dull hum, lifeless, as if nothing had happened. My pulse was deafening in my ears. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I didn't want to look at the window, but I knew I had to. Outside, the fog had thinned slightly. The shapes were gone. Nothing moved, but the air still felt thick, pressed, heavy, patient, waiting. I knew it hadn't left. It was still there, threaded to the radio, threaded into thought, into memory, into fear itself. I sat back, trying to breathe, trying to convince myself it was over. But the static pulsed faintly again, low, insistent, and I knew that it was listening, that it could reach through, that it was patient, and it would return. I reached for the radio again, almost of my own volition. The static hummed, and my name whispered through it once more, almost gently now, almost intimate. Sheriff. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just sat there, trembling, waiting, knowing that somewhere in the hum of the station, in the silence of night, in the fog beyond the windows, something patient and deliberate had marked me, and it would be back. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Even now, hours later, the memory of it presses into thought, into the corners of quiet moments, threaded into fear, threaded into awareness. That voice through the static, patient, deliberate, knowing it isn't gone. And I know, deep down, that one day it will call my name again. The fair was in full swing when I arrived. The lights bright and warm against the creeping chill of early autumn. Music spilled from the carousel and the tents, laughter mingling with the distant roar of the Ferris wheel. I told myself I came for distraction, a break from the night shifts, from the hum of the radio, from the fog that seemed to follow me everywhere. But as soon as I stepped on the main path, the feeling of unease settled over me, subtle at first, like the shadow of a cloud passing over the sun. The crowd was small, just enough to fill the walkways, families and friends laughing, the smell of fried food and sugar mixing in the night air. I started walking, weaving through people, keeping my eyes forward, and then I noticed her, a woman standing near the ring toss, just off to the side, facing me. I froze. It was her face, or at least the face I remembered from years ago, a fleeting memory from my childhood. Someone I shouldn't have seen here, someone I thought was gone. Her eyes locked on me, but the expression wasn't right. The edges of her mouth twitched as if she were trying to speak, but couldn't. I blinked, and she was gone. I shook my head. Probably just a trick of the lights. The angle fatigued. The crowd shifted, bodies moving, faces turning. But then I saw another. A man leaning against the side of the game booth, his hat pulled low. His features familiar, too familiar. He was one of my old neighbors. Someone I hadn't thought of in years. He mouthed words I couldn't hear, and when I squinted, his mouth moved too fast, almost underwater. The expression twisted, his lips curling into a warning, and then he disappeared, dissolving into the mass of fairgoers like he had never been there. I stopped walking, heart hammering, hands tightening in my pockets. I told myself it was just shadows, tricked by the moving lights of the rides, the bright bulbs along the booths. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. There was something in their gaze, the way their eyes lingered, heavy with meaning, carrying the weight of memory and warning. I tried to move forward, weaving past a cluster of teenagers holding balloons. Their laughter rang in my ears, high-pitched and distorted, like the feedback from the radio. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a child sitting on the edge of a bench, her face familiar in that same impossible way. She stared at me silently, her mouth opening slightly, forming words that dissolved before I could hear them. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I walked faster, turning corners between the tents, trying to shake the sense that I was being watched, that every familiar face I remembered was creeping out of the crowd to reach me. Each time I thought I had shaken them, I would see another, an old friend from the department, a neighbor from a street I hadn't visited in decades, a family member long gone. They all stared, mouths moving, eyes pleading, whispering warnings I couldn't catch. I stumbled near the dunk tank, nearly knocking over a small boy holding a prize. He turned and I froze. His face, so familiar, yet grotesquely wrong, elongated slightly, the eyes too large, reflecting the fair lights in unnatural ways. He whispered my name, just my name, repeated, urgent, curling into the night like smoke. I backed away, heart pounding, and when I turned, he was gone. The fair had shifted around me. The lights didn't feel warm anymore. They felt harsh, artificial, slicing into my vision. The music warped, high notes stretching unnaturally, low notes sinking deep into my chest. I could feel the ground beneath me tremble slightly, or maybe it was just a panic building, twisting perception. I pressed through the crowd, trying to find the exit. Every path led me back toward the same cluster of tents, the same game booths, the same carousel lights spinning in slow, hypnotic circles, and the faces kept appearing, in the crowd at the edge of vision, in reflections on shiny surfaces. Familiar faces, distorted, twisted, staring at me, whispering words just beyond comprehension. One stopped me completely. A man standing by the cotton candy stand, leaning slightly, as if the weight of knowing hung on his shoulders. His eyes were mine, or at least they felt that way, identical in depth and wear. He mouthed a warning. I couldn't hear it, but I understood. Fear twisted into comprehension. I was being told to leave, to run. But run where? Every exit I tried led me back to the same swirling crowd, the same distorted figures, the same impossible fare. I turned sharply, nearly colliding with a woman carrying a tray of drinks. She was smiling, cheerful, unaware of my panic. But as I passed, I caught a reflection in a window. Her smile wasn't right. Her eyes held urgency, fear, something impossible. She raised a hand, pointing behind me. I spun. Nothing, only the crowd, moving in patterns that didn't make sense. I tried to shout, but my voice felt swallowed by the night, barely audible over the twisted music and distant laughter. I reached for my radio on my belt, hoping for connection, for rationality, for someone to tell me this was normal. But the signal was gone. Dead air. Only static hissed, faintly whispering my name. Panic clawed at my chest. I ran. Not fast, not enough to escape, but enough to push through the pressing crowd. Faces appeared in my path, stopping me, staring, mouths twisting in silent pleas, silent warnings. Some faces were familiar in memory, some in appearance only. All carried the same weight, the same urgency. I reached the edge of the fairgrounds near the empty parking lot, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I was free. But even there on the cracked asphalt, the figures lingered. Shadows stretched. Faces appeared in the glow of street lamps, pale and urgent. I pressed my hands to my head, trying to shut out the vision, try to make it stop. And then I heard it, not from the crowd, not from the radio, from the shadows themselves, whispering delicate, insistent, leave before it knows. I stumbled back, heart hammering, breath ragged. The words penetrated the static of thought, pressing into the deepest corners of fear. I wanted to run, to escape, but the fair seemed to expand, the distance to the edge stretching impossibly. Every step forward brought more faces, more twisted familiarities, more urgent warnings. I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to ground myself in rationality. None of this could be real. Memories aren't faces in a crowd. Memories can't follow you, but the weight of it pressed in, the way the air vibrated around me, the way the night felt alive, aware something was here, patient, deliberate, observing. I stumbled toward the nearest exit, pushing through the crowd, or what should have been the crowd. Faces blurred into each other, twisting and turning, elongating slightly, mouths whispering, eyes pleading. The music warped again, laughter stretching unnaturally. The lights above flickered. I felt a brush of something cold against my arm, or maybe it was a shadow, or maybe it was fear itself. I reached the far edge of the fair, where the trees began. I dared to look back. The fair lights flickered, the carousel turning slowly, and the crowd was gone. Just shadows lingering where the figures had been. And in the shadows, I swore I saw a face, my own, watching me, mouth opening as if to speak, eyes wide with warning. I didn't wait. I ran past the parking lot, past the tents, past the faint smell of fried dough and cotton candy that seemed to cling to the night air. Branches scraped my jacket, the cool night pressing against my skin, chasing me, or maybe it was a memory of those faces chasing me. Hours later, in the safety of my cruiser, doors locked, engine running, I try to calm my breathing, try to rationalize. Fatigue, anxiety, overactive imagination, but the faces stayed, in memory, in every reflection. Every shadow of the rearview mirror hinted at a familiar, twisted face, whispering warnings I couldn't quite hear. And I just knew that they weren't gone. Not really. They waited in the edges of perception, patient, deliberate. And if I returned, if I ever let my guard down, the fair would be there again, and the faces, distorted, urgent, warning me, would return too. I tried the radio, seeking something familiar, something grounding, static, and in that static, faintly, unmistakably, my name, Sheriff. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel, staring into the fog windshield. I hadn't even left the edge of town yet, but I felt the weight of the fair pressing into me, waiting, watching, patient. I drove on, into the night, knowing that the memory of those faces, the familiar, the distorted, The pleading would not fade. They had marked me in the shadows of the crowd, and in the quiet corners of my mind, they would wait, always waiting. The night had settled in like a heavy blanket, pressing down on the town, muffling sound and light. The streets were empty, save for the occasional flicker of a street lamp, a low hum of the distant highway, and the soft crunch of my boots on the gravel of the back alley behind the old precinct. I should have been home hours ago, curled up under blankets, letting sleep erase the residue of the day. But sleep wasn't mine tonight. Not anymore. The radio on my cruiser crackled, a familiar hiss that had long since become a companion of sorts during these late-night shifts. I reached for it, half expecting silence, half expecting the voice that had haunted my nights for weeks now. It started soft, almost imperceptible, a whisper curling through the static. At first, I thought it was fatigue, a trick of the mind. But then the words sharpened, fragments of sentences, names, places, memories. Help me? The voice was thin, trembling, a fragile thread reaching across the night. My pulse quickened, and I tightened my grip on the wheel. I knew that voice. Not in life, not in the living world, but I knew it in the space between. I had heard it before, not from this radio, but in reports, in missing person files, in the quiet scribbles of detectives long gone. It was someone gone, taken, and now, calling to me, I drove slowly, the headlights cutting through the mist that had begun to curl along the roadside. The air smelled damp, faintly metallic, like blood half remembered in memory rather than sight. Another whisper rose through the static. Justice, please. My stomach turned. This was no prank, no interference. These were voices, fragment of lives erased, threading together in this impossible electrical channel. They weren't random. They weren't for anyone else. They were for me. I stopped at the intersection near the old warehouse district, engine idling, tried to make sense. Faces appeared in the shadows as I glanced around. Not faces I could place, not entirely, but familiar in ways that tugged at memory. Their expressions carried fear, sorrow, anger. I realized with a jolt, these weren't just voices. They were memories, echoes, pleas woven from the moments before death, moments never recorded, never noticed. And somehow, they found their way to me. The static pulsed, louder now, insistent. Revenge. I recoiled, hand pressing against my temple. Revenge. Not help, not warning. Something darker, more deliberate. The victims weren't just calling for attention. They were angry. The moments of violence, the fear, the betrayal. They were replaying themselves through the night, threading through static, reaching for acknowledgement, for justice, or something like it. I remembered the first file that had felt different, a disappearance years ago. Small town case, overlooked. The radio hadn't spoken then, but the memory had lingered in my mind, fragmented, uneasy, demanding attention. And now, they were all here, threading themselves together, spilling through the static in a chorus of despair and accusation. I tried to shake it off, to focus on the rational, the possible. Maybe it was some strange electrical anomaly. Maybe it was the station's old wiring picking up frequencies from old police scanners, twisted and warped by the weather. Maybe, but deep down I knew better. These were not echoes of machines. These were echoes of people. Their fear, their pain, their anger. The car lights caught movement at the edge of the alley. A figure or a shadow, I couldn't tell which, stood there, still watching. My breath caught in my throat. The voice spoke again, clearer, more insistent. See what they did? I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. Every hair on my arms bristled. I had seen victims' families torn apart by grief. I had read their statements, their desperate calls for attention, for answers. And here in the night that had swallowed everything else, they were telling me, showing me, whispering through static and memory. I reached for the recorder in the passenger seat, old evidence tape, thinking I could somehow capture it, document it, prove it. But as I pressed play, the static surged, and the voices layered over one another, hundreds, maybe thousands of fragments, shouting, pleading, accusing, none fully coherent, but all threaded with the same weight. I realized then, it wasn't just a single voice. It was every voice that had gone unheard, every case closed too quickly, every disappearance dismissed, every injustice that had gone unnoticed. And it was all here, alive in the static, reaching through time and memory. I felt my hands shake, my chest tighten. I wanted to leave, drive away, turn off the radio, escape. But something rooted me to the spot. Guilt, responsibility, fear, perhaps all three. They needed acknowledgement. And if I didn't listen, if I didn't hear, what would happen? Listen, the word rose, stretched, almost pleading. I couldn't ignore it. I let the engine idle, letting the car become a bubble, a quiet space where I could focus. The voices shifted, settling into a strange rhythm, almost like breathing. And then I started to hear individual stories. Snippets, small fragments, nothing complete. A young girl, barely 14, whispering, "I didn't mean to go." Her words trembled with guilt, though it wasn't hers to carry. A man, middle-aged, voice breaking, repeating, "They took her. They took her and left me." And another, desperate, furious, You have to see what they did." The static pulsed in response, curling around my thoughts, threading into memory. I realized that I had been hearing these fragments for weeks, scattered in the hum of the radio, and the faint hiss of static when no one else was talking. The voices had been building, gathering, and now they were clear, insistent. I couldn't ignore them. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even blink without fearing I would miss a detail, a warning, a plea. I thought about my own memory, the mistakes I had made, the cases I had dismissed too quickly, the nights I had let fatigue cloud judgment, the corners I had cut to keep paperwork manageable, and the voices twisted my thoughts, showing me what I had overlooked. Every file, every face, every moment of inattention, they remembered, and they were speaking, not for vengeance against me, not entirely, but for recognition, for acknowledgement of what had been done and left unresolved. The night deepened and the voices grew, not louder, exactly, but thicker, more present, layered over each other in ways that made comprehension difficult. I could feel them pressing against thought, threading into synapses, looping in memory, and in that loop, I began to recognize patterns. Names I had seen, places I had visited, moments that had felt insignificant at the time. All of it coalesced into a tapestry of loss and betrayal, stitched together by the faint hum of static that now seemed like the pulse of the night itself. I tried to speak, to call back, to reach them somehow, but my voice felt small, swallowed by the weight of the collective memory. And then I realized they weren't asking for conversation. They didn't want me to talk. They wanted me to see, to understand, to feel the gravity of what had been taken from them. I shut my eyes for a moment, letting the static fill my mind entirely. And there it was, the first full memory, vivid, unbearable. A man, cornered in his living room, pleading for help, the intruder's face obscured, but the fear raw, clawing, tangible. The moment of impact, the struggle, the silent scream, and then emptiness, the absence of response, the disappearance that followed. I opened my eyes, trembling, sweat cold on my skin, and the radio hummed faintly, a soft, almost comforting tone threading through the static. Another voice came, clearer this time. "Don't forget us." And I understood. Forgetting was worse than the violence itself. The erasure, the dismissal, the silence after. They were here in the night, in the static, demanding acknowledgement, demanding remembrance. Not for my sake, not for anyone's, but for them. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had become meaningless. The voices cycled through, stories looping, fragments threading together, images flashing the mind's eye without visual aid. A woman running to the woods, a child left in a parked car, the faint sound of struggle in a quiet neighborhood, and always a radio, always the static, always the weight of the night pressing in, relentless, patient. By the time the first pale light of dawn crept over the horizon, the voices had receded slightly, settling into a low, insistent hum, like a heartbeat that could not be silenced. I sat in the cruiser, drenched in cold sweat, exhausted, but unable to move, the weight of what I had witnessed pressed down, a burden I could neither share nor ignore. I knew, then, that nothing would be the same. The radio would always carry them. The night would always hold them. And I would never be able to drive past an empty street, a deserted building, or a whisper static again without hearing them. The victims, the echoes, the pleading for justice, for recognition, for vengeance. And I understood something else in the marrow of my bones. I wasn't just listening. I was part of it now, part of their story, a witness, a recorder, a vessel for memory and warning. And if I faltered, if I ignored them, the night would remind me, again and again. The radio crackled one last time as I started the engine, faintly, almost like a sigh. Sheriff, remember? I drove into lightning sky, carrying their voices, carrying the weight of their memories, knowing that the echoes of the night would never let me forget.